Good morning. Thank you. I want to introduce you to those of you who do not know the class of 25, the good-looking bunch on the screen. And you'll be seeing each one of them later today. Anyway, good morning once again. For all of us, and even for the class of 2025, it's an exciting day. I warmly welcome all of you to this is the in-portion section. We also have a virtual section. Welcome to all of you who are joining us online virtually. So today we're going to be listening to all the master's projects, all these presentations. And what I'd like to do now is, before all these talks begin and before our interim president, Bonita Durand, comes to the podium to give us her views and wishes, I want to read the land acknowledgement for Buffalo State University. Buffalo State University would like to start by acknowledging that the university is situated within the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, including the Seneca, Tuscarora, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk nations, and of their indigenous relations and neighbors, the Erie and the Wenro. We hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories, and we pledge to work toward partnership with the spirit of collaboration with our current indigenous neighbors, the Seneca and the Tuscarora. And now I'm very happy to ask Dr. Bonita Durand, our interim president, to come to give us all the good news.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, good morning, everyone. And I'm going to add my welcome to the class of 2025 for the Patricia H., I'm reading it to make sure I get it right, Patricia H. and Richard E. Garman Art Conservation Department. I knew and had the pleasure of knowing both Pat and Richard, and they were amazing people, true Buffalonians, very interested in the arts and very interested in supporting Buffalo State and all of our students. So for them to give you the gift of their treasures and name the department after them is an honor. And I wish you could have known them and talked to them. You would have been just delighted to be with them. But today, we are here to celebrate, and the celebration is about your academic achievement, and that's in your master's project presentations. This is an event that's more than just presentations. It's a testament to your dedication, to your hard work, your tenacity as our graduate students here in art conservation. And I had the honor a few days ago to have a sneak preview of some of the works. And so that was just an absolute delight. And I just told Patrick that the woman that was with me is from SUNY Albany. She works in the chancellor's office. I was on a call with her, a Zoom with her yesterday. I don't know if you call them calls or what, but a Zoom meeting with her yesterday. And as I got on the call, she was raving about the students and raving about this program. So just know that your celebrity and the knowledge of who you are and what you do extends far beyond this campus, as you will take it far beyond this campus next year after you graduate. As a tradition, we continue to provide a platform for our students to share the results of their master's thesis or studies as part of their programs. So we don't look at this as the end of a journey, but it is the continuation of your intellectual curiosity, your rigorous research, and scholarly exploration. I have to tell you, I was just absolutely amazed when I talked to the few of you that I got to talk to about how in depth you go with working with your project. You don't just do the work of your project, you research, you dig into it, you get an understanding of it so that you can pour the best that you have into it. And that was very impressive to me. As we move through the day, and I will tell you up front, I can't stay with you all day. I need some of those Tina Fey doubles, like she has, because I have to be in other places. But I just want to encourage you to have a good presentation, engage with the folks that are viewing your work, and discuss your research and celebrate all of your accomplishments, because you all are so special and you all are so unique and so talented. I'm just so very proud to look out at you. And even though I'm gonna admit, when I was talking to you one-on-one, you all were saying words that I didn't understand, but I kept nodding because I could see the enthusiasm in you, and you knew what you were talking about, and that's what's important. So I want to also extend my heartfelt appreciation to our faculty and our staff for their guidance and support. Again, the graduate students, I commend your dedication and your persistence. And I also want to thank, and I want to make sure that you thank your parents, your families, and all those folks that have been on this journey with you. Because it truly takes a village to identify the talent that you have, put you in the right place so it can grow and develop, and then continue to nurture you on the way. This is not a single or an individual effort. This is a collective effort. So in closing, again, I want to express my gratitude to all of our donors. As I said, Pat and Richard have a special place in my heart, but all of our donors, because they have invested in your future, and they will continue to invest in your future. So we know you will make them proud, and you will make them glad that they made this very good investment. My next stop is to go back to the sports arena where we're practicing for commencement. So when I'm talking to the group next year, I'll be going back to the sports arena to practice for your commencement. So I just want to wish you all the very best. I know you all are going, is everyone going out on an internship? So just stay connected, stay close. We're still here. Your staff, your faculty are still here. Come back, have a good experience this year. I know you will. And just congratulations again. And thank you for choosing Buffalo State. You had a few other choices, but thank you for choosing Buffalo State. We're very glad that you came here to be with us. Thank you.
Dr. Duran will be with us for a few moments, which is really nice. Thank you. But I also thank you very much for your encouraging and inspiring words. I do think, like you said, it does take a village. This is the immediate conservation village, and it just extends onward. Just like you said, there's a group from the 70s and 80s called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And I always like to say that that's what the students put into their master's projects, and they do a lot of it in all three versions of that. But I guess I just want to, before I ask Samara to come up, I just want to tell you all congratulations. You completed 2 years out of 3. The third year will seem like a breeze compared to what you just had. So again, I also want to thank all the faculty, like our president thanked you. I also want to thank Jean-Jean Chen and Anne and Meredith for, in a sense, organizing this particular aspect of it. And I also want to give a shout out to Dylan in the back, who's our sound engineer, who will make sure that we can see and hear here, but also virtually. Sam, can you please come up? And thank you.
Good morning. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Sophie Church. Sophie specializes in photographic materials conservation. Her conservation experience includes internships at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin and former employment as a conservation assistant at the Center of Creative Photography in Tucson, Arizona, as well as the Arizona State Library Archives and Public Records in Phoenix, Arizona. Additionally, she completed a Master's of Art degree in Art History from the University of Arizona and published her thesis titled The Maker's Knowledge, Production and Analysis of Ugo de Carpi's David Slaying Goliath. Sophie will start a year-long fellowship with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. this fall. Welcome, Sophie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sam, for the lovely introduction. And today I will be sharing my research and treatment of a mounted Clarence White platinum print. I'll begin by introducing the photograph, then dive into a bit of the background on Clarence White, followed by some chemistry involved in the photograph's creation, then the significance of the papers the photograph is mounted to, and my chosen treatment approach, and finally, the conclusion. This untitled photograph is signed in the top right by Clarence White and dated 1904. It was brought to the Garment Art Conservation Department by a private client for treatment. The layers of this work of art are mounted together with 4 modern plastic photocorners, 8 in total, 1 on each corner of the photograph and 1 on each corner of the papers beneath. The photograph is mounted to a tan paper, which I'll refer to as the secondary support, and the tan paper is mounted to a brown paper, which I'll refer to as the tertiary support. The image depicts 2 young boys, likely Clarence White's sons, playing near a creek. The 2 boys are both wearing matching outfits consisting of a rounded sailor hat, striped Russian blouse with knee pants, stockings, and laced boots. This attire is consistent with popular school-age boys' fashion in the United States at the turn of the century. Russian blouses and knee pants allowed young boys to move freely, which makes sense for these boys to be wearing while playing out in the woods. The boy on the right of the composition is holding a metal lunch pail, though this was also used in the early 20th century for gathering berries and storing dry foods. The second boy is bent down, actively playing in the shallow stream, and another figure stands in the edge of the stream in the upper left of the composition in similar attire. Overall, this photograph is likely of White's 3 sons out in the woods with their father, who is taking their picture. White's son is also the subject of this platinum print by Clarence White in the lower left from the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection. Clarence Hudson White was born in West Carlisle, Ohio in 1871. His father worked as a traveling salesman for a wholesale grocery firm, and when White graduated from high school, he became a bookkeeper at this same firm. In 1893, he married Jane Felix, and they traveled to Chicago to see the World's Columbian Exposition for their honeymoon. This event was White's first major exposure to artists of the day and prompted him to take his first photographs that same year. Making very little money and working long days, White shot photographs predominantly in the early mornings or later in the evenings. White took his photographs in unusual conditions, never in a studio, always in his home or out in the open. Then in 1894, he began serious work with photography, leading to his first exhibition in 1896. In the years to follow, he earned several awards, and through these events, he met many prominent photographers, including Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Steichen, Gertrude Kayserbier, and Alvin Langdon Coburn, whom later in 1902 he founded the photo secession movement alongside. This movement prompted photography as a fine art form and moved away from the view of photography as an accurate representation of the world. These photographers pursued pictorialism, or techniques of manipulating negatives and prints to approximate the effects of drawings, etchings, and oil paintings. In 1904, White left his job with the grocery firm and traveled around the Midwest. He moved his family to New York City in 1906, and the following year became a teacher at Columbia University. In 1910, the Photo Secession sponsored an international show of more than 500 photographs by its members at the Albright Art Gallery, now across the street, the Buffalo AKG Art Museum in Buffalo, New York. The same year, White founded a summer school of photography at Georgetown Island in Maine with F. Holland Day, Gertrude Kayserbier, and co-founder Max Weber. White left the photo secession in 1912 after clashing with Alfred Stieglitz over ideologies of photography as an art. In 1914, he founded the Clarence H. White School of Photography in New York City. White was looking to define the artist's role in the communications revolution of the 1920s. Tragically, White died of a heart attack in 1925 while leading a student trip to Mexico City. However, his school and his teachings continued for many years through his students. My first clue to this photograph being a platinum print was the rough surface texture easily visible with the naked eye or with magnification, as seen in the left-hand image. This is due to it being a one-layer process, meaning the image material that makes up the photograph is embedded in the surface of the paper fibers of the support, as seen in the right-hand image of a cross-section from the Graphics Atlas of the Image Permanence Institute. The platinum process is based on the light sensitivity of iron salts. Originally discovered by Sir John Herschel in 1842, Herschel was attracted to platinum because its chemical nature suggested a more permanent photographic image than silver. There is no record of Herschel going on to make prints with platinum. However, while investigating color photography, Herschel found that an iron salt, ammonium ferric citrate, was highly sensitive to light, which led to the investigation of similar iron salts and generated a new class of photographic processes coined siderotypes, from the Greek word for iron. In 1872, siderotypes came to include prints made with platinum. Then in 1873, the platinum print process was patented by British inventor William Willis. The process was improved and commercialized over the next decade, producing and selling pre-sensitized papers. Until 1882, Joseph Pizzighelli and Arthur von Hubble published practical instructions on the process which allowed photographers to hand-coat their own papers. This fueled the photosecession movement of photography as an artistic form and allowed for further creative manipulations by the photographer. Platinum prints had to be contact printed and were usually made with gelatin dry plates and later sheet film negatives. To make a platinum print, a paper is coated, usually using a brush with a sensitizing mixture of iron and platinum salts, unless the photographer is using the pre-coated commercialized paper. When dry, the sensitized paper is placed in contact with a negative and exposed to ultraviolet light or sunlight. The chemistry of the platinum print process requires two successive chemical reactions. The first reaction occurs during exposure to sunlight or ultraviolet light. The iron salt reduces when iron 3 gains an electron and becomes iron 2, forming a visible yellow-brown image most noticeable in the shadows. Iron 2 is a strong reducing agent for noble metals like platinum, but needs to be dissolved in solution to react with the platinum. Therefore, the second reaction happens during development. The print is developed in a bath containing potassium oxalate, which provides the oxalate anion that binds to and dissolves iron 2. Iron 2 can then react with water-soluble tetrachloroplatinate to precipitate nanoparticles of platinum, forming the final image within the fibers of the paper support. Finally, this is followed by successive baths of dilute hydrochloric acid, which dissolve the excess unreacted sensitizer, thus fixing the print. A final bath of water removes the acid and completes the process. Knowledge of this underlying chemistry of the image shows the photographer's intricate involvement and underscores the multitude of factors prerequisite for the realization of this photograph. Results from analysis with X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy confirm the photograph's identification as a platinum print, as seen by the following peaks for platinum and mercury, iron, and chromium. The presence of mercury indicates its use in the processing bath, which accounts for the overall warm image tone of the print. The presence of chromium could suggest its addition in the processing bath to increase the contrast of the image overall. This print is mounted to two papers, a cream and a brown-toned paper. Clarence White prints in other institutions also show a variety of papers layered beneath the final print. Prints of the pictorialist movement were frequently mounted to multiple papers of various contrasting shades of a single color, often gray or brown, that complemented the tones of the print. Photographers took as much care in mounting the print as they did in making the photograph. The papers were often handmade to emphasize the pictorialist movement's ties to the arts and crafts movement, which favored the work of the individual over impersonal industrial production. Muted colors and rough textures of the papers also appealed to the aesthetic aims of the pictorialist photographers' soft-focused imagery. For these photographers, the mounts were an essential part without which the artwork was incomplete. There is a yellow adhesive residue near the top edge of the back of the photograph, which matches with the shape of the residue on the front of the secondary support. This shows that prior to the addition of the plastic photo corners to the photograph, it was adhered to the secondary support. A sample of this adhesive on the back of the photograph was collected and analyzed using Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. The results show peaks matching with a protein-based adhesive, as well as peaks similar to jute, a type of bast fiber, which indicates some of the paper fibers were collected in the adhesive sample. The secondary support also shows a clear difference in color and fluorescence in the area where the photograph was previously mounted and the area exposed to the elements. This is due to light exposure over time and surface soiling around the edges. The secondary support is still adhered to the tertiary support along the upper edge, although the brown tertiary support has suffered several losses, potentially from being pulled off another mount layer in the past. Remnants of this other mount layer can be seen as light-colored fibers in the center at the top of the tertiary support. Additionally, 2 strips of Japanese tissue, one visible here, remain at the top edge from a previous hinge mount placed between the secondary and tertiary supports. This print and its papers seem to have been through many mountings and remountings in their history. When viewing the tertiary support on a light box, a laden chainline pattern can be seen. Due to the even spacing and consistency of this pattern, as well as the underlying wove pattern to the fibers upon close examination, this tertiary paper is machine-made. However, no specific evidence upon examination of the secondary support or primary support on the light box was found supporting it being handmade nor machine-made paper. A sample of paper fibers was taken from discrete areas of each support, dispersed on slides, and examined with polarized light microscopy. Most papers are composed primarily of cellulose from softwoods, but higher quality papers used in photographic processes tend to be sourced from non-woody fibers such as cotton, bast fibers including hemp, linen, and flax. The sample from the platinum print contained bast fibers and cotton. The sample from the secondary support contained esparto, wood pulp, and cotton. The sample from the tertiary support contained esparto, wood pulp, and cotton. Despite literature suggesting that the papers were handmade to adhere to the values of the arts movement, this examination prompts consideration that the secondary support may also be machine-made paper due to the presence of wood pulp. Further analysis incorporating additional mounted prints by Clarence White would be needed to ascertain his preferred style and choice of paper. For this print, treatment approaches were thoroughly considered and discussed with my advisors and photograph conservation colleagues at various institutions. These conversations revealed the numerous approaches to the degree and type of treatment steps that could be taken for this project, ranging from aesthetic to structural approaches. A treatment approach was chosen to address surface dirt, reduce adhesive residue, mend punctures and tears, and fill losses in all layers. The benefits and risks of washing the secondary and tertiary papers were thoroughly considered. Washing could help reduce discoloration and staining throughout the papers. However, ultimately, the decision was made not to wash the papers due to them still being adhered in the original format and the risks and stresses washing would put on the papers, considering the numerous areas of loss already in the tertiary support. Overall, the structural concerns of the papers outweighed the aesthetic benefits of washing them. Additionally, due to the papers still being adhered, and since separating them by washing was determined too risky, local stain reduction was not pursued in the areas yellowed by the plastic photo corners on the secondary support. Examination and analysis revealed the papers represent the original mounting method and are integral to the material context of this photograph. Without them, some of its original historical and cultural significance may be lost. Therefore, the print was remounted onto the papers to preserve its authenticity and inherent meaning. At the start of treatment, the photograph and papers were released from the photo corners, and the remaining 4 photo corners on the secondary support were removed with a hot air pencil and microspatula. After the first cleaning steps, the mends and fills were addressed. Papers similar in thickness, texture, and tone were selected to match with the losses in all layers. A small area of skinning in the secondary support was filled with toned paper. This is best seen in the right-hand image taken with ultraviolet-induced visible fluorescence. The fill created does not fluoresce and is therefore dark in appearance. 3 areas in the back of the tertiary support were also filled with toned paper. Similar to my previous slide, the fills created do not fluoresce and therefore appear dark in the right-hand image. The difference between these before and after images is small, but overall the addition of the fills brings unity to the edges of the paper supports, as well as increased structural stability. Now, if you're trying to spot the difference between these 2 images, thank you. I mended and filled the following areas, and additionally inpainted to reduce the appearance of abrasions in the print. Here's the before of the upper edge of all 3 layers, and the after. Note the added corner fill to the photograph, the added fill to the tertiary support, and the added fill to the skinned area of the secondary support. The final area of consideration was the remounting. Viewing Clarence White prints at other institutions helped me with this decision too. All institutions at which I viewed his prints matted them in a way that displayed the layered papers beneath when present. Therefore, my decision was simple. And I matted the photograph in a window mat that allowed the paper layers beneath to be viewed, compared to how it was originally matted when it arrived in the conservation lab. This treatment was strongly influenced by historical research, knowledge of the photographic process, scientific analysis, and discussion with conservation professionals. New information was constantly being obtained throughout this process, but it was always important to maintain the needs of the object, and as in the words of Jose Araca, it is the object that makes its own demands on the conservator. Thank you.
Well done, Sophie. We have time for a few questions, if anyone has any. Well, I can kick it off. Following this, what would be the next steps in the research?
If I was to continue this research, I would definitely want to pursue viewing more of Clarence White's prints at other institutions that are also mounted to similar or different papers, and potentially examine those papers for evidence of machine or handmade making, and try to get more of a sense of the kinds of papers and supports that Clarence was using, and how that might have overall influenced his choices. It's really fascinating. Oh, she's got a microphone.
Sorry, yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. Now, when you say you filled the corner, the photograph was missing in that little area, right? It was broken off or something?
Yeah.
So how do you actually fill the corner with, was it a platinum rendered piece of paper or?
Not a platinum rendered piece of paper, but very carefully. A similar paper of similar thickness and tone initially to the existing photographs paper. Something that matched like the tone on the back of the paper, and then we were trying to match it to the initial highlight areas where you can see more of that paper support beneath the image, or like within it. And then I used Kramer watercolor pigments to try and get that kind of speckly look on my fill piece. And then once it matched, then I trimmed a similar shape and adhered it to that corner once it was all dry and everything, of course. It was really fun to do that, even though it's so tiny.
Are you going to make any platinum prints?
I really want to. Yeah, as most of my classmates know, I love experimenting in the darkroom, but platinum's kind of expensive, so there's like no time in second year to be playing with that. But in the future, if I get the opportunity, I would love to try and make a platinum print and that chemistry I described and see how that, as with other photographs, it's very specific, and if things go wrong, I might get something wild. So just trying to understand how intricate Clarence White was with his work would be really cool.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Thank you.
Excellent. So this morning I have the pleasure of introducing Devon Blankenbaker. Devon is a Mellon Lace Fellow and earned a BA in Art History from the University of Virginia, in addition to attending the Brooks Institute to study photography. Before starting his graduate studies, he was an assistant exhibition coordinator and conservation intern at the Albert and Shirley Small Collections Library at the University of Virginia. He also worked as a collections management and exhibition intern at the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection, which features one of the best Indigenous Australian art collections in the world. This past summer, he was an intern in book conservation at Emory, and for his third year, he will be at the Library of Congress in DC. Please welcome Devon.
Thank you, Sophie, for the introduction. Hello to everyone here and everyone watching online. Welcome to my master's presentation, Stamps of the World, Treatment and Research of a 3-volume Stamp Collection. When coming up with the idea of what I wanted this project to be, I knew I wanted to work with an entire collection and not just a single object. So I came up with 3 main goals / sections that I wanted more practice with. Treatment would be the main goal, but there was also archival processing, and then creating a survey of the collection and then using that information to gain information on the entire collection. A quick introduction to the stamp collection. The albums are written in French, and the 3 albums, all seen here, have over 90 countries that are all arranged in alphabetical order. Those countries can be seen there. The albums are likely from the 1940s and 50s. I can assume this because of the dates of the stamps, the added ephemera, and the names of the countries that are present that are no longer those names currently. There are also decorations added throughout the albums, including drawings and these stickers that are seen on the covers. I'm going to start the presentation with section 1, archival processing, with my goals seen here. I wanted to get to know the collection better and be able to describe better what I was looking at. I started with looking into the history of commercial stamp albums to see if I could place my stamps somewhere in the timeline. I'm showing the 3 main categories of commercial stamp albums throughout history, and then I will briefly go into each category. The first is Justin Lallier's albums. They were the first commercial stamp album that was created shortly after the very first usage of stamps around the 1840s. This type of album was very popular and quickly spread around Europe before going to the rest of the world. They were printed and bound like contemporary 19th century books with folded gatherings and very detailed covers, though not many have survived in good condition because of the poor materials that were used. Moving on to the next type of binding is the spring-back bindings. These albums were made in several parts. You can see those parts in the images above. The albums began with loose pages that were placed inside of a wrapper for protection, seen in the first image. The binding of the album has a metal spring in the spine that was opened by placing one board flat on a surface, and then in a very unnatural movement, you crush the binding to open the metal clasp in the middle, where that wrapper could then be slid in. You can see that in the middle and bottom image. Loose and blank stamps were very important at this time for stamp collectors because it gave them the freedom to make any collection that they wanted, and they were able to share specific pages without having to take the entire album. The last type is a more modern steel ring binder. The pages are hole punched and loose leaf for the same reasons I mentioned in the last binding. And then for these, polyester pockets are used to be able to tuck the stamps into the albums instead of adhering them directly to the pages. So, where do my albums fit? And the answer is they don't really fit into any of these commercial albums. So I began to believe that these were hand-done one-offs. The evidence of this can be seen throughout the albums. In the top right image, might be hard to see, but there is a very small graphite line that is still present in the title pages that acts as a guideline for the final ink titles. In the bottom right image, you can see the grids that are present throughout the albums that the stamps are placed into. These lines are not perfectly straight and somewhat overlap each other. And then the sewing for the books are not perfectly aligned like they would be if it was a book that was sewn by a machine. I finished processing the albums by making a model to get a better understanding of the structure, especially how the text block was attached to the board, since that would be a very big part of the treatment later. Here are images of the model making process. I want to mention the top left image when I was folding the signatures for the album. The glassine interleaving that is seen in the text block and used to protect the stamps were not tipped in, but folded along with the signatures. And that one detail will come up later in the treatment. Also, I want you to look at the bottom middle image, which is of a linen strip that is hooked under the first signature and will be used to attach the text block to the board. Continuing with the model making process, this is where you could see the attachment of that linen strip in the top right. Also looking at the bottom left image, you will see a second linen hinge. This makes the attachment to the text block in the board very secure. For a model of this size, this much support is overkill, but for the large, heavy stamps, this would be very important. So, now that I know more about the history of the stamp albums and somewhat about their structure, it was time to dive into the collection, which meant looking at a lot of stamps, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stamps from the over 90 countries and cities. To make sense of everything, I started with making a diagram. This diagram is normally used to look at the structure of the books, to see how many signatures and pages are inside of the album. But it also helped me make a roadmap to map out which countries were in each album and color code them, as you can see, and then also see which pages had stamps and which pages did not. Having this diagram was very helpful later in the treatment when I needed to look for specific countries. Stamps were not the only objects in the albums. There were also quite a few ephemeral objects, everything from World War II letters and stamp sheets to envelopes from a dentist's office in Rochester and a flyer for a 2007 Collectors Expo. I wanted to catalog these items to describe them and mention which albums they were located in. To do this, I used information in a Finding Aid template from the Sustainable Heritage Network, seen on the left. And then you don't need to read this, but on the right is part of my Finding Aid, where I wrote just a little bit of the details about the items, the dates that they were likely made, and then which album they were in for the owner to find later. Once I finished with the processing, I moved on to section 2, which was treatment, and here are a couple of my main goals. So, looking at the 3 albums from the outside, there was some lifting paper on the covers, but overall they looked like they were in pretty good condition, and 2 of them actually were, the 2 on the right, but for this one album, when opened, looked like that, which is obviously not very good. The cover was fully detached from the text block and would need to be reattached. All of the albums were treated, but this one took most of my time. Treatment started over some snowy days with some dry cleaning. This was done with cosmetic sponges and an air puffer. I went through each page of the 3 albums, focusing on the gutter, especially in the most damaged album, because of it's no longer being attached. There was a lot of debris and dirt that had entered through and around the spine. Tear repair was next, but before I jumped straight into the albums, I wanted to practice on my handy-dandy book model. The non-glassine paper in all of the albums were in pretty good condition. The tear repairs were straightforward, using Japanese tissue and wheat starch paste, but the tears in the glassine were more of a problem. I ripped and crinkled the glassine in my book model and treated it with Berlin tissue, a tissue that was already made in the department. It was made with Klucel G in water, which could be reactivated with water. This was chosen because of the thinness of the tissue. It closely matched with the glassine. I was glad I practiced with the book model first because using the Berlin tissue was actually quite difficult. Because of the thinness, there were handling issues and difficulty adding enough water to reactivate the adhesive, but not enough to fully break down the tissue. But once I felt I had enough practice, I then moved on to the albums. There were not many long tears in the glassine, but there were a few, with this one being the longest. As you move left to right through the images, you can see me moving my way down the tear. I needed to use small sections because of the handling issues I mentioned previously, and I needed to mend both sides to prevent any tinting when the pages were turned. A barrier was placed between the underside of the tear and the stamps, just to prevent any excess water from the Berlin tissue from solubilizing the adhesive used for the stamps. The end sheet of the most damaged album was detached from the text block and needed tear repair and edge stabilization. All end sheets were made using a pulp painting technique, and a detail of that can be seen here in the middle. Berlin tissue was also used for this because it was strong enough to give support, but it was thin and transparent enough that the color of the end sheet underneath shone through, so the tissue didn't have to be toned. The end sheet was then placed into a folder to be put back into the album later. Working with the most damaged album, I needed to clean the spine to continue the treatment. The image on the left shows a linen strip that was adhered to the spine. This can be better seen once it was fully removed in the image to the right. It was no longer flexible and preventing movement, and this was likely a previous repair of some kind, since this strip was found in just this one album and not the other two, which otherwise were identical. To remove this, I was able to use mechanical action, pulling the linen straight back and at a low angle with a lot of downward pressure, seen in the middle. Once the linen was removed, the remaining dried adhesive, which you could see, was removed using a blunt metal spatula. Continuing with spine cleaning, I removed the original spine lining because it was no longer supportive to the text block, and the brittle adhesive began to spread around the album, which I removed during dry cleaning. To do this, I used methyl cellulose as a poultice and mechanically removed everything with a spatula. This process was also quite difficult, and looking at the after photo on the right, you might think, wow, there's still a lot of stuff on there. It does not look like you did anything. And that is because there is a lot of stuff left. Like I saw with the book model, because the glassine was folded with the signatures, it was the outside folio. So the original spine lining that had become brittle and degraded was adhered directly to the glassine, which in turn had also become degraded and very brittle. So I was very conservative with how much I was able to remove without damaging the already damaged glassine. After the cleaning was done, the book was in a press, and I added a partial or panel spine lining that was just added between the sewing stations for a reason I will mention later. Consolidation is the next step for all three albums. The marbled paper that was used on the covers of all three albums were lifting around the edges, and to prevent further lifting and future damage, I used a mixture of wheat starch paste and Lascaux 498 to re-adhere the lifting areas. Polytex was used to keep pressure on the paper as it dried, so it adhered to the shape of the board. Now, back to the main album. I realized sewing new signatures would need to be part of the treatment for several reasons. I noted evidence from at least one missing signature from thread fragments that was still adhered to the spine that I saw while cleaning. You can also see here a gap between the text block and the board. The new signatures would build up the text block to match the spine and the shoulder of the binding, so the album could continue to open and close like it was meant to. To add the new signatures, I first added sewing support extensions, which is why I only used the partial linings before to keep those areas open. These new extensions would accommodate the new signatures, which were made from a dove gray paper that was cut and folded to match the original signatures. A jig for the sewing was created and used to match the sewing holes for the new signatures. And then to attach them to the text block, I started by double sewing the top 4 original signatures before moving into the new ones. This gave them added support than if it was just sewn directly to the top. Once the signatures were added, I placed the album in a press, seen on the bottom right, and added another partial spine lining that encompassed the new signatures. Treatment for the album ended with reattaching the board to the text block. I added a 3rd layer of spine lining, a full lining that covered the sewing stations. That lining had a extended hinge, which can be seen on the left, and this would be the main connection between the text block and the board. The original hinge and some of the paste down was lifted in order to tuck the extended hinge onto the board, which was adhered with wheat starch paste and PVA. The original hinge, which can be seen in the center photo, was also adhered down to the new signatures using the same mixture of wheat starch paste and PVA. The end sheet that I previously treated was then tipped in onto the original hinge to match the style of the rest of the albums. The remaining albums still needed more support. This was given to them first with partial spine linings. I did not have access fully to the spines, so with partial spine linings, I was able to tuck them between the spine and the text block and adhere them to the text block. This would prevent any of the wobbling that was seen in the text block. Hollytex was used to prevent any adhesion to the spine, which you could see in the left photo. The hinges were also tightened for the 2 albums using some of the skills I learned over the summer. Using a wooden skewer with PVA and wheat starch paste, I tucked it into the hinges to apply the adhesive. The albums were then placed into a press between nipping boards to dry, and once they were taken out, this cut down on the wobbling between the boards and the text block. So once treatment was done and everything was stable, I moved on to the housings. For the ephemera, I created L sleeves with mylar to hold them, and then these mylar sleeves were then placed into the front of each album. For those albums, I used another skill I gained over the summer and made clamshells. It's a process I love doing, which is great because I needed to make 3 of them, which were very large. There are a lot of photos, but the main one to point out is the image on the top left. I knew I needed a lot of book cloth, so I started with a template and then laid it out over the book cloth we had just to make sure we did. And that looks like a lot of book cloth, but that was only just enough. The rest of the images are just the process of making a clamshell box. The housing ended with the clamshells drying on the left and the addition of information on the spines on the right, which included titles of the albums and the names of the countries that were present in each of them. My final goal, section 3 of the project, was to create a survey and use it to gain information on the pigments that were used in the stamps. The survey was just of green stamps, which prevented me from going overboard and looking at every stamp I thought looked cool. A random number generator was used to pick the country and the stamp. Once I got 4 stamps from each album, again trying to limit myself, I noted where they were from, the year it was made, and who or what was depicted, as well as some information about its current condition. So, once I had all 12 of my stamps, looking at them on a map, I was very happy I got a good distribution of stamps from most of the world to be able to compare them better. To look at the pigments, I first started with XRF. I used the Bruker Artex 400 with the setting seen. XRF cannot be used alone to identify pigments because it will only give you elemental information, but it was good as a starting point, and it would let me compare the stamps to each other. For the procedure, I took 2 spectra, one of the green pigment and one of the background, which was the paper that was used for the stamp and then the actual paper for the albums. The background would help me in seeing which peaks were present in both of the spectra. That way I could take them out of the pigment. And then the images up here just show the 2 locations that I took spectra at for this stamp from Togo. To look at the Togo spectra, the green line is the background and the red line is the pigment. You can see large peaks for lead, iron, and chromium. The peaks for calcium and barium are also seen, but they are present in similar ranges in both the background and the pigment, so it is likely from the treatment of the paper and not have anything to do with the pigment. I considered the pigments to be a mix of Prussian blue and chrome yellow. I determined this using a website, colorlex.com, a website that was mentioned in our class that allows you to look at pigments based on the elemental data that you have found. These pigment choices make sense because as synthetic pigments, both Prussian blue and chrome yellow are relatively cheap and easy to make, and therefore widely used around the world. I won't show all of these spectra, but most of them resulted in the same pattern, with peaks at lead, iron, and chromium, with lead leading to Prussian blue and iron leading to Prussian blue and lead and chromium for chrome yellow. There was one outlier, however, for the 12 stamps, which was Central Lithuania. There were peaks that showed iron, but there were no peaks for chromium, which means Prussian blue could still have been present, but just another yellow pigment. Here is a chart of the elements I found using XRF, which was nice to see that they were all pretty much the same, except for the one outlier. The chart shows all of the elements and then the possible pigments, which again are very similar. And then I got that information from the website. I used a second type of analysis, FTIR, to confirm what I was assuming. I was not able to see chrome yellow, but on the left you will see similar spectra for 4 stamps seen here. With a similar marker seen here. On the right, looking at that Argentinian stamp a bit bigger and comparing it to Prussian blue, getting a close peek gave me more confidence in saying that it was Prussian blue that I was looking at. So, looking back at my sections and the processes I wanted to practice on, did I get them from this project? And I think I did. This project gave me more experience in describing and cataloging materials in front of me, treating book structures to make them stable enough for use, and using a survey to gain information about the pigments used in the creation of green stamps, which I can make assumptions for the rest of the collection. It was such a pleasure to work with all of these albums, and I want to end not just this presentation, but my second year of grad school with some nice green confetti. An acknowledgement of all the people that helped me in this project, including my advisors, co-advisors, the wonderful people at the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum, all of these stamp forums where I spent a lot of time, and the entire eBay website. More thanks to the funding sources that made my education possible, and of course my friends and family. Thank you all for the support.
Thanks so much. We have some time for questions if we have any.
As all paper conservators know, glassine is notorious for being reactive to water and moisture. So did you run into that problem when mending, and how did you deal with it?
So I ran into that problem more with the book model, which is why I was happy I practiced with it. The amount of water used for the Berlin tissue was just like a whisper of water, that it wasn't a whole lot. So I ended up just putting a little drop of water onto one side of Hollytex, letting it dry for a bit, and then putting the Berlin tissue there for like a second. So it didn't feel wet to the touch, but it was just tacky enough to hold. And because I was using it in such small pieces, there wasn't a lot of excess water. So once I figured it out in the book model, once I got to the albums, I didn't have any problems.
Hi, Devon.
Hello.
I was curious, how were your stamps adhered to the album? Or were there any that were like loose or like lifting that you had to set back down?
Yes. So luckily there weren't too many loose stamps, and to put them back, they were all just in the gutters of the pages they came from, except for one that was in a completely different album. But they are originally adhered in a couple different ways. Some of them have the little glassine hinge on the back, and it's just adhered that way. Some are just like slathered in animal glue and just really stuck on. When I reattached mine, I just used methyl cellulose on the hinge or just a little dot on the back to reattach them. But yeah, most of it was the glassine hinges.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Up next, we have Elise. Elise Cabral earned her MA in Art History from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She interned in the labs of Zucca Art Conservation in Oakland, California, the University of Michigan Library, and the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming, focusing on the conservation of books and works on paper. She returned home to San Diego as the pre-program Mellon Fellow in Paper Conservation at the Balboa Art Conservation Center, where she remained as paper conservation technician before joining the Buffalo class of 2025. Elise spent the summer of 2023 at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art and looks forward to spending her third year as the advanced intern in paper conservation at the Library of Congress. Please join me in welcoming Elise.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to share with you my thesis, Difficult, Artist Intention, Materiality, and Treatment of a Kurt Schwitter's Collage. The final course of action for this project took a very different direction than what I had initially anticipated, and today we're going to look at several factors that affected that decision-making process. The subject of my thesis is Difficult, that's the title, a late example of Kurt Schwitter's collage work. Before we discuss this specific piece, I want to take some time to examine Schwitter's biography and prior work. Kurt Schwitters was born in Hanover in 1887 to shop owner parents. He developed an early interest in art, and in 1908, at the age of 21, he began studies at the School of Applied Art in Hanover. During this time, he worked in a painterly neo-impressionist style and developed his skills as a portraitist. Though he was producing representational work, it is evident that he was exposed to the avant-garde at this time. As early as 1910, Schwitters began writing on his theories of art, a task that would occupy him for the rest of his life. He was concerned with the spirituality, psychology, and physiology of abstraction, writing, "Abstract art is a transcription of an elevated feeling that everyone can read." In 1917, Schwitters began his experiments in abstraction, rapidly moving from geometric non-objectivity to Cubist-inspired abstraction, to the collage work that would come to define his contribution to the canon. This piece, Mertz Bild 1A, represents a defining moment in the artist's output. Mertz is a nonsense word coined by Schwitters that would come to be a totalizing philosophy of his life and work. Mertz, he wrote, refers essentially to the embrace of all conceivable materials for artistic purposes and technically to the equal evaluation of individual materials as a matter of principle, end quote. That is to say, under Mertz, bits of waste paper are elevated to the same status as artist materials as the oil paint of the old masters. The term would serve as a tool for all of Schwitter's output. He wrote Mertz poems, painted Mertz pictures. He called his small collages Mertz drawings and called the installation sculpture that would spend years of his life the Mertzbau or Mertz house. He would sometimes sign his name, Kurt Mertz Schwitters. The 20s were an incredibly productive decade for Schwitters. To various extents, he participated in the movements of his time. He published in the Der Stil Journal, exhibited with expressionists at the Strum Gallery, contributed to the Bauhaus publications, and he's frequently described as one of the great Dadaists, despite the fact that his apolitical work denied him formal membership in Dada. Mertz was the only movement he really considered himself a part of, and it had only one member. Over the decade, he produced hundreds of Mertz works, most small-scale collages of pasted papers. By the 1930s, his association with the avant-garde and leftist figures made him a target of the Nazis. In January 1937, Schwitters flees to Norway, where his son Ernst was already living. Later that year, his work is purged from German museums, and 4 pieces, 2 of which can be seen here, were included in the second Degenerate Art exhibition. A Mertz picture was featured in the catalog, and he was described as an artist of accomplished insanity who painted only with the contents of garbage cans. In Norway, Schwitters had some peace, if uncertain. His wife Helma remained behind in Hanover and helped ship Schwitter's most significant works. Their letters expressed hope that things in Germany would calm down quickly. He continued to make, show, and sell art, Helma visits in late 1939, and the couple saw each other for the last time. In April 1940, German troops invaded Norway. Schwitters, with Ernst and his daughter-in-law Esther, fled overland. The refugees spent 2 weeks on the road, detained occasionally by both Norwegian and British military before they were able to catch passage to Scotland on a Norwegian icebreaker ship. Despite his status as a refugee who was subjected to public disparagement by the Nazi Party, Schwitter's status as a German national meant that he was held in a series of internment camps. His final camp was Hutchison Camp on the Isle of Man, where he was permitted to set up a painting studio. There he painted portraits of fellow detainees on pieces of linoleum flooring. One prisoner would later recall the mold and stench that resulted from Schwitter's attempt to substitute porridge for plaster of Paris. Despite these creative diversions, Schwitter's faced a hard reality. Letters share every desperate rumor of safe asylum across the Atlantic. His release in December 1941 brings us to the Schwitters that created the piece that's now laying in the drawer down the hall. It's titled Difficult, shares sentiment with a number of other Mertz works from this time. These pieces, all made during Schwitter's first year of freedom in Britain, aptly describe his mental state. He's desperate for money, separated from friends and colleagues, and stranded in a nation at war. The materials of Difficult give us further insight into the realities of Schwitter's situation. This piece is an exemplar of the Mertz practice of lifting found items to the status of artist materials. Difficult utilizes candy wrappers, bus tickets, letters, advertisements, newspaper and magazine clippings, and etching, and much more. These items are made of a variety of materials, including various types of coated and uncoated papers, cellophane, and leather. The correspondence included in this collage include an envelope addressed to Ernst. A side effect of living with the great Mertz artist is that no paper was safe. A clipping of an envelope from the Royal Academy of Arts, one of the many contacts included in his list of potential sources of aid. And an intriguing partial letter addressed to someone named A.R. Cryer, referencing pictures by Erkurt Schwitters. While reviewing archival correspondence, I came across a letter from Cryer to Schwitters. Schwitters had sought Cryer's assistance in locating his artwork that had gone missing from a gallery. Cryer wrote back that he received an apologetic response from the gallery, which he enclosed. The enclosed letter is not to be found in the archive because Schwitters mertzed the bad news. Some of the most abundant items in this collage are candy wrappers. These were a precious commodity in the midst of the austerity of wartime Britain. These were likely provided by Schwitter's lifelong friend, American artist and noted collector Kate Steinitz, who wrote that she would regularly send care packages of candy, cigarettes, and nylon stockings. Small tastes of the asylum in the US that she and others were working to provide for Schwitters and his family, and that they were unable to bring about. Like the chocolate, bits of packaging and advertisements for consumer goods are reminders of better times. American magazines, likely also sent by Kate Steinitz, provide the source for many of the most prominent elements in this collage. While examining other pieces that Schwitters created at this time, I was excited to recognize a familiar design on a piece held in the collection of the Sprengel Museum. After taking a closer look, I realized that a single image had been torn into 3 pieces and incorporated into 2 artworks. I was able to identify the image as an advertisement from the February 1940 issue of Esquire magazine. I took a closer look. Turning back a few pages, I found the source of 2 other elements on the Sprengel collage. And turning forward in the magazine, I found another bit of Difficult. From this one magazine, we have 6 elements across 2 artworks. But there's more. While reviewing this presentation, I recognized something from an image I used on a previous slide. From one advertisement, we have not 1, not 2, but 3 separate artworks. If we take another look at these pieces together, a picture emerges of the artist at work. We can imagine Schwitters in his studio working on several pieces simultaneously. While applying turquoise paint to one piece, he turns and daubs some on the frame of another. He distributes the round brown candy wrappers across all 3 pieces. He rips off the bit of an advertisement for one piece and retrieves the cast off for another. This piece was flagged for conservation by its caretakers at the AQG due to several condition issues. There were significant tears in some elements. Many of the cellophane pieces were split and lifting. And it's a little difficult to see in the photographs, but the entire piece appeared to have some significant distortion, with the top right corner being a couple of centimeters out of plane with the rest of the piece. And the whole piece had a generally dirty and grimy appearance. Out of concern that these issues would progress, Difficult had been stored flat on a shelf, and the piece was considered unexhibitable in this condition. When I was offered this piece for my thesis work, I was of course very excited to work on an incredible work of art, but the more I looked at it in its frame, the more nervous I got. It's an incredibly complex piece with such a variety of materials, all of which expand and contract at different rates. The wrong move could have disastrous results. I let it sit in its frame for a bit while I researched. The AKG acquired this piece from the Marlborough Gerson Gallery in June of 1965. Prior to their acquisition, the piece was photographed for the catalog for the gallery's Fritters retrospective. This photograph, despite its oversaturation and lack of resolution from the printing process, can provide us with a record of the condition of the piece in early 1965. We can see that the extreme fracturing of the red cellophane has not yet occurred. However, we can see that the curling break in the yellow cellophane is already present. The long break in the transparent candy wrapper tissue does not appear to be present yet. Though I don't know exactly when the photograph was taken, it appears in the catalog for the Marlborough Gerson Gallery show in the May of 1965. So I think it's safe to assume it's from early 1965 at the latest. After this photo was taken, Difficult did a bit of traveling. It was shipped from their London gallery to retrospective at UCLA, and then to their New York City gallery, which is when the AKG acquired it. It was sent to its new home in Buffalo before the AKG sent it to the National Gallery in DC. In 1969, it made the long journey to the Museum Nacional de Bellas Artes in Buenos Aires, returned home for a bit, and made a European tour in 1971, stopping in Dusseldorf, Berlin, Stuttgart, Basel, and Hamburg. In 1987, we have the next published image of Difficult, and we can see that the most extreme damage has been done to both cellophane and the transparent paper. Both of these materials are highly sensitive to fluctuations in relative humidity, and it appears that the fluctuations the piece endured on its travels were too much for these materials. It still looks scary, but I at least had the comfort of the knowledge that the most damaged areas have been stable for at least 40 years. I was beginning to feel a bit more comfortable. I summoned my courage and the help of a few classmates to finally unframe the piece. I was relieved to see that the most structural damage, the distortion to the upper right corner of the board, was actually the result of the piece getting wedged into the wooden sink that it was previously housed in. The very slight distortion was evenly distributed across the piece, and with proper framing, it wouldn't be noticeable at all. The project was looking more manageable, but I still wasn't sure what to do about the tears. I reached out to conservators at the Sprengel Museum, where the Schwitter's archive is housed, and Jan Brandt at the Menil, who had previously treated a number of pieces for their Schwitter's exhibition. I received kind words of advice with similar themes. Phrases used include, proceed with extreme caution, a very light hand is necessary with his work, and focus on minimally invasive treatment. With this encouragement, I was already leaning towards leaving the tears be, but what really made the course of treatment certain were the words of Schwitter's himself. In 1930, Schwitter's friend and collector contacted him over some concern for a Mertz collage that had suffered some tears after years of hanging above a radiator prior to his acquisition. Schwitter's wrote back, "It made me really sad that you were worrying about the picture. I will certainly believe that there is no reason for you to fear that it might tear further. It was placed above a radiator, and that was why some tears developed while I was still kind of a little girl. Since I have heard about her misconduct, I have certainly watched my daughter more closely and can assure you that during the time I was still able to watch her, no second misconduct occurred. I believe that she, now a middle-aged woman, will at any rate keep her promises." In this letter, Schwitter seems unperturbed by the tears. He reassures his friend that the damage was the result of improper environment, and he sanctions its continued status as his artwork in the present state. His words, together that the knowledge that the damage too difficult was the result of the same kind of fluctuating environments, and that had not changed significantly since 1987, made me feel comfortable that in the case of the major tears in the piece, no intervention would be an acceptable course of action, and that the introduction of new adhesives and repair materials to the complex structure would only introduce new stress points and areas of potential future failure and further damage. I next considered the dirty appearance of the work. Many areas appear quite grimy. This is particularly noticeable in the swaths of blank paper covered with embedded dirt, and there's a waxy haziness over much of the piece and several accretions on the surface. As I studied Schwitter's, I began to understand that the dirt and grime is just part of the Mertz. The pieces of paper that make up a Mertz work were rescued from gutters and garbage bins and dried on Schwitter's radiator. Added to the mix was Schwitter's rather untidy process. A particularly evocative description of his working habits is provided by Kate Steinitz, who recalled the odors of his studio as a combination of an artist's studio, a kitchen, and a zoo, thanks to the ever-present combination of starch, plaster, and clay, the hot glue and cooking food on his stove, and the guinea pigs he was fond of keeping. Friend and artist Hans Richter recalled a similar scene, quote, "He washed his feet in the same water as his guinea pigs, warming his paste pot in the bed, feeding the tortoise in the rarely used bathtub, declaiming, drawing, printing, cutting up magazines, entertaining his friends," end quote. He often worked his collages in a wet state, pouring mixtures of paste and glue over the surface and manipulating the wet paper to create wrinkles and dimensionality. Schwitter's working environments and wet surfaces are bound to result in some embedded dirt. And some of the stained and dirty appearance also comes from the inherent vice in the materials themselves. Most of the elements are ephemeral materials made with cheap acidic wood pulp papers. Darkening, such as where the magazine clippings lay over the piece of textured leather, are the natural result of the acidic degradation of cellulose. In her 1994 paper, Issues in Collage Conservation, conservator Daria Keenan calls these changes blind collage elements, which appear at a time, part of the life of the piece, and a continuation of an experiment begun at an earlier time, end quote. I like this contextualization, and it feels very Mertz to me. Though the piece was initially considered unexhibitable, with research, I began to view the damage in a different light. That's the curious thing about determining the extent of treatment and conservation. It's incredibly contextual. Consider another piece currently in the Department for Treatment. This 1964-65 Ellsworth Kelly lithograph suffered a deep scratch and burnishing to its surface. The essential nature of an Ellsworth Kelly piece, the turn from gestural abstract expressionism to the consciously impersonal nature of hard-edged aesthetics and the pure formal pleasure of the uninterrupted interactions of color and shape, is destroyed. We are confronted with ink on paper. On the other hand, though the damage to the Schwitter's piece is considerably more physically significant, it remains legible as a Mertz picture. While it may be appropriate to leave the damage on the Schwitter's as is, the Kelly would require aesthetic intervention. An understanding of the initial intent of the artist and the artwork's place in art history may result in very different treatment measures and extents for each individual project. Now that we've discussed the treatment that I didn't do, I want to share what I did do. Here are my before and after treatment photos. And though they look the same, I promise I did do some treatment. The frame Difficult was housed in, which I have to say was created long before the AKG's current excellent team had any input, was fitted poorly, and as a result, there was some rubbing to the extreme edge of the collage. Working under the microscope, I went in with some methyl cellulose and consolidated the tattered and bent edges. It's a very slight change, so it's really only invisible under magnification. And here is my most dramatic before and after photo. Another issue that I addressed is some flaking and lifting in a coating that Schwitter's had spread over the surface of several elements. Working under the microscope, I used a paper point to gently poke out a suspicious flake. If there was movement, I went in with a brush and delivered some methyl cellulose to the absorbent paper below. Then used the paper point again to gently hold it down until it held. And then after it all fully dried, gave it another poke to make sure everything was secure. In many ways, conservation is about transformation. This is obvious in a pair of before and after treatments of, say, a broken vase, but it occurs in less visible ways as well. Though only minor treatment was performed, and the changes in the before and after are nearly imperceptible, the piece still went through a transformation. It went from a piece that was kept horizontal on a shelf and forbidden from movement out of fear of further damage, to a piece that, with new framing and conservation materials and storage in the kind of stable environment that the AKG provides, will continue to exist as a great Mertz work, With some research, the damage was placed in its context, and difficult caretakers can now feel comfortable with this exhibition. Thank you to everyone who helped me with this project, particularly Teresa Smith. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you to everyone at the AKG for entrusting me with this project and for your receptiveness to the vast changes in treatment plans. And thank you to everyone here today. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Elise. We do have time for a few questions if anyone has one.
Actually have a question.
Yeah, okay, me too, so you go first.
Wonderful presentation. I'm so impressed with the work that you did, especially identifying things in the collage.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the bibliography, but how did you know what magazines to look at?
Happily, a lot of mid-century magazines are fully digitized online and accessible in resources like the Internet Archive. And a lot of times they are searchable. So using little key phrases helped. And then realizing that he was using the same magazines for a lot of these. So once I found one, I kind of flipped through the whole thing and recognized stuff. Yeah. It was a lot of fun finding that, like that part of the process.
Amazing, Elise. Can you go back to the slide where you did the little video? That was amazing.
Oh,
I wanted to
thanks.
ask the little tool that you use to kind of settle the paper.
Yeah. Those are just paper points that dentists use. So they come in a variety of kind of thicknesses, and they're wonderful little tools. I can show them to you. We have them in the paper lab.
And
Yep.
what magnification is it? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, I'm 32, I think, something like that. It was a Dynalite image.
Beautiful.
I think it's about 32. Thank you.
I'll ask my question. After he was let out of the internment camps in Scotland, did he do any further traveling with his works?
He remained in England for the rest of his life. He died shortly after. He was pretty young. But yeah, he remained in England, not for lack of trying to get elsewhere.
Okay. I believe we're going to recess for a 20-minute break and start again at 10:40.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I have the pleasure of introducing Vu. Vu Do is a Fulbright Graduate Fellow in Conservation at SUNY Buffalo State University. Originally from Vietnam, he worked as an art educator, artist, and curator before coming to Buffalo. He holds a BFA in painting from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. Vu Do's responsibilities include the discovery, conservation, and curation of the Hidden Treasure collection by Phan Ke An, a renowned Vietnamese painter of the 20th century. He possesses a keen interest in the study of the manufacture and conservation of East Asian lacquer artifacts. Upon completing his graduate studies, he aspires to advance conservation efforts in Vietnam with the goal of establishing the first interdisciplinary conservation training program in the country. Vu completed an internship at the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Arts last summer and is set to spend his third year in the Object Conservation Department at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Vu.
Thank you, Maggie. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm excited to present my master research project on Vietnamese lacquer painting. This project is a culmination of the knowledge and skill I have acquired during my 2 years in Buffalo. By conducting extensive scientific analysis, I aim to deepen our understanding in this unique, culturally significant art form. This project may serve as a model for conserving this type of medium, as it addresses many common issues and challenges encountered within the Vietnamese lacquer community. This presentation, I will cover the 5 key parts: historical context, technical imaging, scientific analysis, and recent discoveries. This painting here is a part of a 4-piece polyptych lacquer painting that depicts the daily scenes of Hawaiian people, a subject dear to the artist, Tim Nguyen. I got to know Tim through a good friend of mine, Việt Anh. After discussing the scope of this project, Tim was incredibly kind and supportive. He built a crate, packed the artwork, and shipped it all the way from Hawaii to Buffalo. The painting was commissioned by a dear collector of the artist. The work was completed in Vietnam in 2008, shipped to Hawaii, and have been displayed at the Collector Beach House in Honolulu. From 2008 to 2019, the painting has undergone drastic change, as you can see in this picture. Unfortunately, this photo was among the few documents that the artist could find. So we can have a glimpse of how this would look like when it was 16 years ago. During this time, the artist attempted to restore the painting by using this wood polishing product called pledge, which you can find at home improvement store like Home Depot. According to the artist, the painting was clean and the color was bright for a short while before all turning dark again. After 2019, the painting was restored in the artist's studio. In 2023, the paintings arrived at the Buffalo State for further study. I would like to explain briefly about East Asian lacquer material for those who are not familiar with this unique material. Donna Strand once said, "Lacquer is the first human plastic." It is derived from the sap of the sumac tree. There are 3 main types of this lacquer: urushi from Japan, China, lacquer from the tree grown in Vietnam and Taiwan, tisi from Burma and Cambodia region. It is very similar to that of American poison ivy, which can cause severe allergy. Here's a picture that I taken during my trip to the lacquer plantation a few years ago. You can see the sap oozing out, the tree collected by the shell. After collection, lacquer is separated into different grades. The high-pitched grade have very low water content, transparent, making it suitable for final coatings and paintings. In contrast, the lower grade contain more gum and water, causing them to dry quickly, make them ideal for panel making. Basic chip coatings and a very strong adhesive. Once partially cured, lacquer becomes insoluble in most solvent. hard and durable, but it's very sensitive to light as its age. As you know, I already mentioned working with lacquer can cause severe rash. There's a picture of my hand, my arm, after working a month with lacquer. I thought I was the chosen one until one day it became an outbreak. It was an unforgettable experience. It used to be a punishment back in the day. People get stripped naked and then pushed into the jungle and suffered unforgettable moments. Briefly about Vietnamese lacquer panel construction, it's very similar to that of Western panel. With lacquer used as the main adhesive instead of animal glue, each step requires the lacquer fully cure before sanding and applying to the next layer. A traditional panel might take up to 30 days, consists of some 20 layers minimum. Lacquer is a unique substance that only cures under high humidity due to the process of polymerization of the film. While the lacquer film hardens, it could turn dark, wrinkle if it's supposed to very high humidity and temperature. Over the time, lacquer film can turn back to its original yellow. You can see how huge of a change with just different temperature and humidity, which make painting with lacquer is also a challenge, unpredictable. Let's take a look at the current condition of the panel. Structurally speaking, the artwork is stable. There's no visible damage or distortion. Everything is fine. However, there's a great change in color compared to when it was freshly made. Now let's do a quick comparison. First look at the guitar. Original was sort of yellow, tan, acoustic guitar color, turning brown. The bright green turned to dark green, the skin tone, the yellow, and then the orange ground, the sky has gone tarnished. My quest is to find out what caused this change. And everything in common, they all contain this, I think, yellow pigment. Think about it. Bright green need green and yellow, orange need yellow and red. They all have the same pigment in common. So I have performed, this is the opportunity for me to try explore all different imaging techniques with lacquer painting. I feel extremely grateful to have learned all this amazing technique from our Professor John Chen, and to be able to use this state-of-the-art photo lab and studio with this project. This does sound like a different language to many of you, but at the end of the day, I just want to explore as many as I could. I won't be able to go over everything, but I will focus on a few techniques that I will want to highlight. We have normal raking, specular, as well as other IR technique, X-ray, UV luminescent. First, we will take a look at the X-ray image. Many years ago, before coming to the program, I have always wanted to apply X-radiography on lacquer paintings, just like what I did while studying Old Master Western painting. Thanks to Professor John Chen, it's a dream come true. Vietnamese lacquer painting is like painting in reverse, I would say. But I'm going to start with details, where radiography can reveal the underlying composition, which was done in transparent lacquer, as well as the structure of the panel. It also reveals the distribution of metal leaf that have often used extensively in this kind of artwork. In particularly, we found many metal shape, look like staple, embedded in the wooden surface. Whoever made this panel, I don't think the artist is aware of it, might have used a recycled piece of plywood, and they probably hammered it into the panel to make it flat. I think this can cause a problem in the future, given if there's any change structurally. Moreover, we could see that X-radiography can reveal the texture of the fiber, the fabric that was applied in the, on the ground, right? Increasing the in contrast of the image. We can see the thread of the fiber. UV visible reveal layer clear resin, which was commercial product, so Home Depot applied by the artist himself to resaturate the paintings. You can see here in this image, it looked kind of hazy, green, yellowish all over the painting. IR luminescence showed that the same material was used to paint the dress, was applied to the guitar, which now all turned brown, which all look pink in this color under IR luminescence, false color. Moving on to scientific analysis, I want to use this opportunity to carry out as many as I could, both pigment identification as well as lacquer analysis. First will be, we'll talk about XRF analysis. It's the first step in scientific analysis to get an idea of the map of the elements that we use. And to my surprise, that yellow pigment all contain, but I think all contain arsenic. I found arsenic in everywhere. In all of the tested spot, I believe I did like 30 spotted tests, spectra. And that scared me. This painting is extremely toxic, need to be handled with care. And I remember the artist told me about he wanted to clean it and wash it and, you know, fix it himself. So this arsenic pigment with XRF analysis, we need to further identify what is this layer, what is beneath this layer, because lacquer have many layers in each color. And by that, I begin my journey in doing so many cross-section. I fall in love with it, and I explore so many different techniques. I truly have fun. And this is among some of the results that I was able to capture. A sample was taken on various spots throughout the paintings with the permission of the artist, because the lacquer layers are so complex. One sample might not be enough, and it was scary, you know. I try my best to do very minimal. And we will take a look at just two samples, S2 and S10. One in the guitar area and one in the leaf, where I might think that explain the reaction, the change of the color. First, we look at this under dark field as well as UV fluorescence. You can see that under UV fluorescence, very easily to see all the layer structure behave differently under UV radiation. Some of them fluoresce, some of them not. Let's look at this detailed cross-section image. Pay attention to the top two brown meniscus. There's two areas proving that the pigment has undergone exposure to something. Light, the environment has undergone discoloration and turned brown. Why the part that was embedded lower, that was not exposed to that environment, stayed the original color, I guess. So we further investigate this by using scan electron microscopy. Thanks to Blythe McCarthy at the Freer Gallery, she was kind enough to help me do a lot of scan on this cross-section. And we was able to map out the arsenic, sulfur, and silver. Now, we know that it contains arsenic and sulfur, but it could be many things. It could be realgar, it could be all pigment, it could be para-realgar, or it could be arsenolite. And as I learned from recent a few recent research. Arsenic pigment, when it's degraded, it travels. It can travel within months, being exposed to light and across the layer, across the surface. It's everywhere. So if you are watching this and if you use arsenic pigment, be careful. So this spot scan is on the very top layer of that brown meniscus that I showed you earlier. Unfortunately, we cannot narrow down what exactly is the material, since it have oxygen. It could be arsenolite, it could be realgar, it could be arsenic. So further investigate this, we use Raman spectroscopy with incredible help from Dr. Gregory Smith from Indianapolis Museum. He was kind enough to help me identify all the pigments, all the layers. And the result was incredibly such a surprise. We're seeing pararealgar. So the material that the artist acquired at the time was not opiment or was not realgar, it was pararealgar, which is strange to me. Another thing I need to point out that Tim, when he was working in Vietnam, he did not work in his own studio. He was working at his friend's studio. And it was among the first few objects that he worked with lacquer. So he just used whatever was available. Didn't know what material was. I won't go into detail of other color. I just want to talk and highlight about this yellow pigment that I might think is the culprit of all of this change in color. We're further looking into the S10 color. Remember the guitar? How it's changed from yellow to brown, tan. I'm sure the artist was very upset once he see it change over the year. But lacquer, all this change, I must say, is unfortunately is irreversible. Here, we did a scan on the surface, and the result come out as a polycrystalline silicate, as you can see, which I think is must be from the pledge. So now that's another issue. So when it's in contact with the top layer, what happened there? What undergone over the years besides exposing to strong light and high humidity? And not even mention the chlorine in the air. It's by the sea, it's a beach house. So it's a very complex. With all that information, I decided to create mock-ups with the incredible help from my friends, and especially thanks to Anh Công, who is the former assistant. He worked with team while making this painting. So we were able to interview him and ask about specific material that he used, and luckily he still remembered and was able to describe us. And Tom, my best friend, helped me to create this mock-up, shipped all the way from Vietnam to Buffalo to be able to do this analysis. And we want to recreate what happened with this lacquer, and then further analysis to investigate. So we decided to choose S2 again and S10 as the study subject. We use a STM standard test for oil paint. There's no standard test for lacquer yet. Hope there'll be one in the future, but it's as close as we can get. Here, you can see that the sample was half exposed to light and half covered in foil. But need to note that the environment is about 65 Celsius degree and a little low in RH. I did not actually record that, but this can be checked later. And instead of doing just one cycle, I truly blasted it. We did 3 cycles to really want to see it gonna happen. As you can see, the control on the very left, and then the middle row is the middle column is the sample without salt. And the third row is the sample that was having sprayed with saline solution. Here's a picture of it over the time that I keep recording. And you can see with the cross-section I taken at the end, after some 1,200 hours, the top layer turned kind of dark and black. Now we're going to investigate what that is. I was lucky enough that we had a visit from Hyrox. Special thanks to Professor John and Steve that helped me capture this amazing image. I must say that is a state-of-the-art equipment. We were able to capture this tiny, very detailed area where you can see that this black substance migrate, I believe that which is I think, silver, I will confirm this later, migrate through the layers to the surface and forming this crust. Because, you know, silver ions is such a noble metal. It readily available underneath it with energy from light. It can travel. And with sulfur readily available around it, it's going to turn black, you know, get ready to dress, you know, turn from iridescent to black. And that bring me back to this is the picture of the micrograph of the surface of the painting. And now you see the similarity. This might have been what happened to the surface of painting, where you have all this crust of silver byproduct forming on the surface of painting and then obscure the actual color. We did a little mapping, which is incredible. The Hyrox was amazing. That you can measure the depth of that micro crack. You can see 0.3 micron. And I also proved that the substance on the top was laying on top of yellow. So conclusion, I think, photogradation caused by strong light combined with incompatible pigment was the main cause of the color change. Artists should avoid using arsenic pigment due to their toxicity, not only from the pigment themselves, but also from degradation products, such as arsenolite. Silver ions can migrate to lacquer surface under exposure to strong light. The silver ions, when react with sulfur, will readily available from the environment. My recommendation is a synthetic varnish, which brings me to the next research on our project. Finding an ideal varnish for lacquer painting have always something in my mind. And in the winter, I did a presentation on lacquer, on part of this project at the National Gallery of Art. And I got a lot of feedbacks, amazing feedbacks, and Jay Kruger, head of paintings, conservation department, he suggested that try something low molecular weight resin that use aliphatic solvent, which can be safely removed for such sensitive material. Luckily, last month we had the opportunity to learn about painting varnish with two amazing experts, Jill Witten and Rob Proctor. A big thank you to Professor Fiona Beckett to arrange this workshop. I have taken this chance to try out a variety of different recipes with lacquer paintings, and here's the result. This painting by artist, my friend Leamington, was used as a test subject. Half of the painting was coated with 5 different common varnishes. I could modify the varnish to achieve a wide variety of different surface sheen, from gloss to matte. It can also resaturate the color, as you can see in the photo. There are more tests need to be done, but I think this is very promising for lacquer conservation, especially lacquer painting. I wouldn't be able to achieve all of this work without the incredible help from everyone, all the faculties, all of the advisors, my mentors, my family, friends. A big thank you to the artist team, my wife too, all my friends, and the government as a conservation department, the faculties and staff, the class of 25, 26, 24, all the scientists from various museums that have me put this together. It's still a continuing, going project. Trust me, Thank you for all the funding opportunity that's make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Vu for that wonderful presentation. Unfortunately, we do not have any time for questions, so join me again in congratulating Vu.
Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Charly. Charlotte Starnes is a second-year Library Archives and Book and Conservation Fellow here at Garment Art Conservation Department at Buffalo State University. She earned a BA in Art History from Florida State University and also holds a BA in International Relations and Global Affairs from Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida. She has pre-program experiences in conservation and preservation at the Georgia State Archives Conservation Lab, the Florida University Special Collections Library, and the Florida Bureau of Archaeological Research Conservation Lab. Last summer, she worked with binder Donald Rash, attended courses at London Rare Book School, and interned with the American Philosophical Society, learning book conservation under Renee Wolcott. This summer, she will attend a course on Carolingian binding at Montefiascone in Italy with Elodie Levesque. For her third-year placement, she'll be at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. with Renata Mesmer and team. Please welcome Charly.
Thank you, Kate, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. I hope we're ready to talk about family Bibles today. Today, I'd like to talk about a family Bible from 1885, produced by Thomas Kelly of New York, that's currently undergoing treatment here in our department. Unlike typical family Bibles, this one was acquired by the owner's uncle for his love of printing processes and prints within. It lacks any inscriptions in the family pages. However, it hosts a number of ephemera that date mostly to the early 20th century, hinting at its previous owners. I chose this project first and foremost because the book had been awaiting treatment since 2018. As you'll see very shortly, these books are quite common and complicated, and there's a mixed range of opinions and feelings about them. But for me personally, I knew there was much to learn from this book and its treatment. First, I had never worked with a large format or oversized book before. And second, 19th century materials are inherently difficult to work with, and I knew this would challenge me mentally and technically and emotionally. I wanted to work with leather, and I knew that this book was a good candidate for a leather reback. And finally, the book had metal clasps that were severely bent and would be a great introduction to books with enclosures. As any respectable graduate student does at the beginning of any project, the first thing I did was go to Google. And rather than finding websites or resources with detailed histories of 19th century religious texts and their structures, as you would, I really just found out what these books were up to today. eBay, for a wide range of prices and conditions. Facebook Marketplace, for a little bit lower prices and a bit rougher condition. I've also found YouTube videos from the early 2000s of many conservators and restorers working on these Bibles. They have also made appearances on TV, and most shocking of all, I learned one made the big time and wound up in the White House. This project consisted of multiple parts. First, I surveyed conservators and regional centers to get a feel for current conservation practices surrounding these Bibles. Next, I conducted extensive research into the history of 19th century book production and the significance of subscription publishing specifically. I visited the Michael Zinman collection of canvassing books at the University of Pennsylvania's Kislak Center for Special Collections. And then I examined and documented the structure and condition of the Kelly Bible, along with similar Bibles at this university here, and nearby at the Buffalo History Museum and the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. And finally, the project culminated in my treatment of the book. Today, however, I will only briefly highlight the survey, pertinent history, and value of my visit to the Zinman collection, and the majority of this presentation will focus on aspects of my examination of the Bible and the treatment up until this point. So let's begin with the survey I completed. This was accompanied by a lot of email and Zoom correspondence with regional conservation centers and other conservators regarding these Bibles. Around 35 people responded to this survey, which I'm told is quite a lot, which I disseminated in the Book Arts listserv, along with 2 AIC community discussion groups. It aimed to understand who owns these books, where they are being treated, and what conservators observe about their structures. Additionally, I sought to identify common condition issues and how they were addressed. Results from the first few questions of the survey confirmed assumptions about who is treating these structures, who owns them, and how common they are on conservation benches. A large portion of these Bibles are indeed treated by private practice conservators. Most of these books are privately owned, and there's a wide range in the frequency of treatment by survey respondents. Some will see just one a year, while others may treat more than 12 annually. Historical research. So as most of us know, the 19th century was marked by rising literacy rates and a growing middle class, with a surge in demand for the books and printed materials, prompting a significant shift in printing and bookbinding production methods. Machinery could output volumes far beyond previous capacities, and efforts focused on streamlining processes, mechanizing tasks, and sourcing cost-effective materials to make books more accessible to a wider audience. This was not an abrupt shift, however, and there was a transition period when traditional hand processes were practiced in conjunction with newly developing machine ones. Emmett Gerard, class of 2022, studied the identifiable marks left behind by the binding machinery of the 19th century in her master's project, which was really helpful in my research. The landscape of book publishing also underwent significant transformations during this period. A small corner of that world belonged to subscription publishing. Due to the cost of materials and the overall production of books, some publishers sought and relied on subscriber commitments, and certainly for these large Bible printings. Subscription publishers utilize canvassing agents to sell books directly to consumers through subscription, particularly where traditional bookstores weren't accessible. These books existed on many subjects outside of Bibles, ranging from religion and etiquette to different histories and even guides for animal husbandry. I was fortunate to visit the Michael Zinman collection at the University of Pennsylvania, which consists of materials related to subscription publishing and books known as salesman copies, samples books, or canvassing books. Each was used by salespeople to advertise multiple binding styles, and the collection offered me valuable insight into how agents were told to describe these books and their bindings. I examined about 15 Bibles with sculpted or high relief covers, which was also incredibly informative for this project. Examination. Alongside the examination of the 1885 Thomas Kelly Bible, I examined 6 other books, 3 books from the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, and 1 at the Buffalo History Museum's library, and 2 more Bibles that were provided by Todd Pattison, a fairly well-known book scholar and conservator here in the States. These books, despite being published by completely different companies and spanning 3 decades, shared similar cover structures and internal matter. The comparison was critical in helping me unravel nuances of these book structures, and you may see some of them pop up in the rest of this presentation. So typically, examination of a book will start outside and work its way in, but today we will start with some of the interior features and work our way out towards the binding. Understanding the original organization and structure of a book is important before treatment begins, especially if it will require separating any of the text from the binding. This was one of the first very odd things about the Thomas Kelly Bible. The collation was, well, pretty off. Different sections that comprise the book have their own page numbers, and then they start often on numbers other than 1. The Catholic Dictionary begins on page 6 and goes to page 90, and is followed by the History of the Holy Scriptures from pages 4 to 17. And then within all of these 13 differently numbered sections, there are lots of illustrations sprinkled throughout. Other Bibles had similar combination of sections and remarkably similar collation. This may indicate that these standard sections were printed at different times or even by different printers altogether. The sections of the book featured several different types of industrial machine-made wove papers. There were at least 6 visually and tactilely different types of paper within the text block, and several more types of paper were used in the binding, some of which are listed and shown here. These included highly calendared and sized papers, light and fluffy papers, each paper tailored for the specific printing process it used. Decorative coated papers embossed with silk moire patterns were used for the decorative end sheets, and the thick papers that made up the hollow spine and in-band supports included an array of fun inclusions like the remnants of other prints, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. As mentioned previously, enjoyment of printing processes was part of the reason for owning this book. The Kelly Bible contains relief, intaglio, and planographic prints throughout, a feature consistent across most of the Bibles I examined. With inventions of the stereotype and electrotype processes in the 19th century, prints in this book are incredible examples of contemporary photomechanical relief printing, and they can use numerous color plates for one image. They also can mimic lithographic printing processes, but in relief. Steel plate engravings were a luxury, and these prints are visually identified in the books by their different papers that they are printed on. The engravings can really ramp up the price of a book depending on how many are present. Elegant decorative marriage certificates were common and are splendid examples of how lithographic processes were also mixed with relief processes. And other fun prints include hand coloring and stenciled color editions. Also inside, the Kelly Bible has 2 leaves of photographic album pages at the back, and these are comprised of stiff, thick paper pages laminated with thinner sheets to create the windows for cabinet card photographs. Turning to the construction of the text block, the Bible was sewn on 3 thin cords for sewing supports, with 2 kettle stations at either end. It was likely hand sewn, but using an abbreviated sewing method to save time and materials given the size and large number of the pages, and the time required to sew them. A common signature formation I noted for most of these Bibles consisted of 4 folios or 8 leaves per gathering. With the Kelly Bible, the sewing was best seen from the spine once it was cleaned during treatment. Note the places with and without sewing, indicating where signatures were skipped with the sewing thread. A faster, more efficient way to sew large books, both in the front and back signatures are oversewn for additional support, but in distinct styles, possibly indicating different hands at different stages of the production. The Kelly Bible also features a very robust hollow spine made from a thick laminated paper wrapped in loose woven textile. The purpose of the hollow spine are generally to provide an additional attachment point for the cover material, facilitating the book's opening and to allow the cover to be made off the book. Hollow spines can be made many ways, but typically are a sheet of stiff paper folded in thirds to overlap onto itself, like that found on the Jones Brothers Bible up in the top right-hand corner. The original hollow spine no longer supported the book function, and readhering it was not an option because of its poor quality of materials. So we needed to replicate how it was made to understand its construction and durability. A unique feature of this type of binding is that the top and bottom boards are constructed of 2 boards sandwiched together. The uppermost board is shaped in high relief, while the other board is flat and lays against the text block. Though there are several known binding structures with similar multi-board constructions, these do not fully define the Kelly Bible's board construction, which has been a problem. Using radiography to examine the boards revealed an unseen interior construction. A patent from 1864, filed by one William T. Anderson of Brooklyn, revealed some insights into what these pieces may be. But also some of the Bibles I examined revealed the interior construction as well. Junk board, as Anderson describes it, is scrapbook board used to support the interior of the high relief decorations. In his patent request, Anderson boasts that their installation is so easy that even a child could do it. The patent elucidated a potential procedure for forming the board component of these bindings as well, which was incredibly informative. Examining board attachment is crucial for understanding the binding process, documenting the archaeology of the binding, and for conservation. In the book world, an in-board binding generally refers to books where boards are attached to the text block before covering material is applied. Traditionally, a sturdy construction, especially for larger books. In a case binding, boards and spine are created separately off the book and then adhered with adhesive to encase the text block, attaching to the hollow and the end sheets. This allows for the decorative stamping of the covers and spine off the book. The absence of sewing supports joined by the boards certainly suggests that the case structure was used for these books, and often. However, as we mentioned previously, the rapid transition and innovation of the 19th century still saw some of the binders blend older and newer techniques. A number of the books I encountered during my study are not as straightforward, with cords in various positions, but the book clearly being stamped in a hydraulic press. This was supported by my surveyors, where most reported seeing cords placed or possibly haphazardly landed in and around all the sides of the boards. Some of the more perplexing structures, like the one from the Zinman collection in the top right, featured cords placed more intentionally between the boards with a piece of paper adhered on top, indicating possibly this was done before the top board and bottom were joined. a budding hypothesis began to take root. A hybrid approach for this binding that would take advantage of the two-board technique is possible. Here, the top half of the board was stamped and decorated off the book like a case binding, while the bottom half of the boards were attached to the text block, like an inboards binding. This is not yet a definitive conclusion, but it's an exciting development, and I'll need to see more Bibles. In an era dominated by cloth bindings, these books stand out with their full leather covers. Advertisements from the Zenman collection shed light on the diverse binding styles available. French Morocco and Turkey Morocco were considered the epitome of luxury, boasting intricate stamping and tooling on both edge and covers. On the other hand, American Morocco and arabesque leather with marbled edges were a more affordable option. Most of the books I examined showcased gilded text block and board edges, along with gold stamped covers. The leather types varied visually, with different grain and follicle patterns and varying degrees of degradation. Other potential decorative add-ons were 4-edge clasps. I did XRF analysis on the clasps that were with the Kelly Bible, and it revealed these to be brass, a copper zinc alloy. Luckily for me, they were not what was called a pot metal, a much harder copper lead alloy that was also prevalent at that time and would have been way more difficult to reshape. Condition. So major issues with the Kelly Bible were detached front and back boards, damaged preliminary pages and leaves throughout, leather deterioration, which included red rot, abrasion, and delamination, particularly on the spine and top cover, broken and bent clasps, and weakening and separation of the hollow layers and the in-bend structure. Another common issue for these books is inherent vice. Ink formulations vary for different paper and printing techniques. Degradation of the text and illustrations can result from the migration of oil-based ink components, often causing significant discoloration or staining. Acid migration from the inks can also result in browning of adjacent paper sheets, and the acidity of many 19th century papers poses its own problem, as evidenced by severe discoloration where the two sheets make direct contact. Additionally, paper from this era is prone to embrittlement and foxing, making it extremely fragile to handle. Finally, something frequently considered during treatment of these structures is the ephemera found within. Every structure I examined contained ephemera, and these present their own challenges and conservation issues in a treatment. These include clippings, photos, notes, inscriptions, pressed flora, textiles, and even hair. There we go. Finally, before treatment began, I needed to address the challenges of safely handling a book of this size, especially given my petite stature. Additionally, I wanted to ensure its safe storage in our department's drawers where books are held. I made a custom tray to facilitate easy and safe access to the book within the drawer. I also constructed a temporary adjustable cradle with Velcro and blueboard, as well as temporary top and bottom boards out of blueboard and wrapped in Hollytex to protect the shoulders for safe handling and examination. Choices for materials used in the conservation of these books are complex. My survey echoed this. I chose gold and fluid acrylics to tone my paper and textile fills, and Hewitt leather dyes, which are aniline dyes, to dye the leather, both commonly accepted materials here in conservation. For paper repairs, I used medium-weight Asian papers for structural mends, thinner lightweight Asian papers like Tangujo for general mends to the text block, and thin Western wove paper for fills on coated paper end sheets. Other materials chosen for this treatment include cloth and leather. Strong cotton fabric was used for board attachment and spine linings, while linen fabric matched the original hinges. Calf leather was chosen for the reback due to its strength and availability, while goat leather with more grain and texture was used to fill the small areas of loss. This treatment required an arsenal of adhesives and varied approaches to their application. With so many materials at varying levels of degradation, sensitivities, and needs, I used this project as an opportunity to really consider the choices made during treatment. So, treatment. First, I carefully removed all ephemera from the book after meticulous documentation of their original locations. For surface cleaning, I used soft and stiff bristle brushes along with cosmetic sponges, focusing on paper edges and gutters where the accumulation of dirt and debris was. Remarkably, and not so remarkably, all the end sheets were found in the back of the text block, and mending of these along with the damaged preliminary pages is complex and still ongoing. This complexity called for a more strategic, or as I like to call it, the Goldilocks approach to mending. I chose and toned several different weights of papers and tissues, using them with different adhesives and different modes of application depending on what was needed. To begin the reback treatment, the original spine was removed, and this simply involved a continue to split the hollow in half. Further mechanical reduction of the layers built up on the spine until I reached the paper lining. A poultice of methyl cellulose aided in rehydrating the thick layer of hide glue beneath the paper, rendering it absolutely delightful to gently scrape away. Once appropriately cleaned, a barrier lining of lightweight hanji tissue was adhered to support the signatures. At the same time, the original spine piece underwent cleaning to remove residual paper from the hollow. To safeguard the spine for subsequent steps, a facing was applied to protect the gold stamping in fragile areas. The leather was then further mechanically reduced from the back to eliminate the degraded, unstable red rot layer and to ensure good readhesion later. This revealed previous losses to the uppermost grain layer of the skin, which I filled with thin patches of toned goat leather for visual reintegration. The boards were surface cleaned where safe to do so, and then prepped for the reback process. This involved using a lifting knife to raise the original leather and create a space for the linen flange to anchor. The lone clasp still attached to the boards was removed. And of course, we can't overlook the end bands. They were carefully separated from the delaminating thicker paper material to which they were attached and gently cleaned. Once I maneuvered and adhered the sized cotton textile between the board edges, I was ready to adhere them to the spine, effectively rejoining the boards to the text block. I constructed a new hollow spine off the text block thanks to the mock-ups Ann and I made. We found a solution that would be true to the original structure, adhering the end bands in the same manner and providing support safely. Once we had these elements, including the rescued false end bands, I adhered this to the spine with small adjustments made here and there. I could then reattach and turn in a leather piece I dyed, cut, and pared for the spine. The prepared original spine piece was then adhered back in place and tied down. Here, you can see it in the book hospital while it's drying. I then prepared the original spine piece and it adhered back to the place where and adhered it back to place where, Final steps included removing facing tissue and adhering the original board. As you can see here. I flattened out the metal clasp with a rawhide mallet and encapsulated the ephemera in mylar sheets and created small post binding that will live with the Bible in new housing. I also created a table of contents and included photographs showing the original placement of the ephemera in the book. With Devon's help, we devised a quite large clamshell box with space to store the post binding and an integrated cradle to both store and view the Bible safely and protect it from further degradation. A comparison of before and during treatment photos demonstrates the improvement in appearance, and you'll have to take my word for the improvement in structure and function. Despite the many hours I've already spent, there's still some page mending to complete. I want to work on toning the shoulders of the new leather to further integrate the new spine with the covers, and of course, more mending. Some final thoughts about these books. Gary Frost calls them disturbingly interesting. An anonymous surveyor came forward with some brutal honesty. And so what are my thoughts? When I think about bindings like this, first I think that you can never underestimate the value of something like these to people that cherish them as family heirlooms. They are special even if we don't see them that way because of their inherent fragility, industrial roots, and difficult conservation. And secondly, I think about how fast they are disappearing. Even though it seems like they're everywhere, the fact is that the original structures are disappearing before we have even understood them. We are at this moment where their inherent nature and problematic materials relegate them to a life of constant interventive conservation or restoration, and any last attempts to sell their pieces on Facebook Marketplace. They are interesting. These bindings represent an economy in the truest sense, and as I learned from Nicholas Pickwood last summer. From their prints to their binding process, they showcase the talents of creative individuals who crafted and adorned them. Blending traditional craftsmanship with industrial innovation, it's crucial to recognize and appreciate the ingenuity behind them, even if they may not grace the shelves of prestigious libraries like the Beinecke. So yeah, they're neat. Thank you for listening. I have a lot of thank yous. I just quickly want to say thank you to Ann and Teresa, also Andrew Hewitt and Todd Pattison for your help outside of the university. It's really crucial for me. And thank you to my family for supporting me through my hectic process here. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Charlie. I think we have time for maybe one question, if anyone from the audience.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you so much for your presentation. Very beautiful. I am wondering, when you were doing your reback step, adding the new toned leather spine, did you insert your flanges under the first bore or between the first bore and the second bore?
That's a great question. Anne and I struggled with this because the two-board structure, if we put it just between the boards, would that be as secure? And also, where do the boards hit sort of the shoulder of the text block? So we went with where the boards hit the shoulder of the text block and then tried to do the same on each board. Because of the photo album pages, the shoulders are very different from the front and the sides. So I did end up splitting the first board a little bit to stick the flange in. So that's where he ended up. Yeah.
I think that's all the time we have, so thank you so much, Charlie. Let's give her a round of applause.
Excellent. Now I have the privilege of introducing Madison Whitesell. Madison is a second-year conservation fellow specializing in objects at Buffalo State. She holds a double major in studio art and art history with a museum studies concentration from James Madison University. While at JMU, she held positions in the Preservation and Special Collections Department of Carrier Library and worked as a studio assistant and instructor at Bridgeworks Glass Studio. After graduation, Madison worked for 5 years as a conservation technician at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. And throughout her pre-program experience, she worked closely with Dr. Eric Uffelman to perform imaging and analysis for numerous East Coast museums. Last summer, Madison explored textile conservation at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And this summer, she will intern at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, focusing on stained glass conservation, and will transition to her third-year internship at the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. this fall. Welcome, Madison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm excited to share with you guys a portion of my master's research with you in refracted, reflected, reversed, the technical analysis and treatment of a Chinese reverse glass painting. During my second year at Buffalo, I focused a great deal of my time on the treatment of this reverse glass oil painting seen here. I'd wanted my master's project to focus on a glass-centric object, and there were 3 structurally damaged reverse glass paintings already in the department. It seemed like a fun challenge, a little bit of glass and a little bit of something else for twice the practical experience. Most enticingly, it gave me the opportunity to spend more time researching the material Hexyl NYL1, an epoxy I was currently using in a different glass treatment. My master's thesis encompasses many different components, and I will not have time to talk to you today about all of them in depth. Instead, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of the piece, providing a little historical context and insight into how it was made. And then I'll talk to you a little about the investigation and research I did on Hexyl and how that informed my treatment. And finally, I'll be focusing most of today's talk on the object's treatment. Reverse glass painting, fabrication. So what exactly is a reverse glass painting? At its heart, it is a painting, but with 2 key differences. First, its substrate is glass rather than wood or canvas. And secondly, it's painted backwards or in reverse. What that means is that all the paint you typically see on the topmost layer on a canvas has been applied as the first layer on the back of the glass. This may include highlights, fine lines, or decorative elements. Base layers are then slowly applied over these details, working backwards to the largest areas of paint application. With the paint applied to the back of the glass, it is flipped and viewed through the glass from the front, which gives the paint a rich, saturated gloss. Those sim panels may have been made with the intention to be viewed in transparent light, similar to a stained glass window. Most are not, and would have been framed or used decoratively in furniture. As glass is a very non-porous surface, adhesion between the paint and glass layers in many reverse glass paintings is very fragile. We do not know a great deal about the context in which this piece was made. Its style and imagery suggest it is Chinese, and this is further supported by its subject matter. The older figure depicted on the panel represents the Taoist god Fuxing, who represents happiness. He wears court dress and holds a cloud-like Rui scepter. The identification of the panel's subject matter was helped by an associated panel depicting Shuzing, the god of longevity, who is seen as a happy old man with his rotund belly on full display. Fuxing and Zhaozing are two of three stellar deities commonly depicted together in Taoist mythology and Chinese folklore. It's likely that there was a third panel once depicting Luzing, the god of wealth and prosperity, but that is no longer accompanying these two. When thinking about the treatment of this piece, I was first and foremost thinking about how to rejoin the glass. Hexyl is a two-part optically clear epoxy with a refractive index very close to soda lime glass, and it is ideal for use in transparent glass repairs like the one I was undertaking. Development with conservation in mind, it has a purported lifespan of up to 100 years before yellowing. It has a long working time of up to 12 hours and is generally considered to fully set somewhere between 3 and 7 days, but may not be fully cured for up to 14. It's frequently used in glass conservation as it is one of the few materials that creates a nearly indistinguishable repair on the glass surface. I'd begun working with the epoxy last year on another small glass repair. My great interest in glass meant that I had a great interest in working with Hexyl and learning more about the material. For one of the rare materials developed specifically with conservation in mind, many people hold strong opinions on its use. Glass conservator Stephen Koob says as the opening lines to his publication, Tips and Tricks with Epoxy and Other Casting and Molding Materials, epoxy resins are frequently used both as adhesive and as fill materials for loss compensation. Conservators should avoid them whenever possible. In opposition to this, I encountered a lot of people that used Hexyl frequently in their work and didn't regard it very differently from any other conservation material they were using. As someone new to the material and trying to get a feel for its appropriate use, I was seeing a lot of conflicting information. A basic summary of arguments for Hexyl could be summarized as such. Epoxies like Hexyl are the optical ideal material for glass conservation because they are perfectly transparent and can be closely matched to the refractive index of the glass you're working with. Epoxies set without any solvent evaporation and therefore develop no bubbles or otherwise visual imperfections that can be used for joining end fills. Well-prepared Hexyl will age for 100 years before any yellowing occurs. Unfortunately, epoxies are very strong, far stronger than glass, and run the risk of causing damage if the object is under any strain. Additionally, they are irreversible once set. Epoxies only swell in solvents and cannot be fully dissolved. It is possible for repairs to be successfully reversed, but they often involve baths of toxic solvents and put the object itself at risk. In addition, many conservators have seen Hexyl yellow prematurely within years of a repair. I could easily talk about my ongoing investigation and research of Hexyl for this entire presentation and far longer if allowed. In addition to research and mock-ups, I conducted a survey through the AIC DIS list looking to get a better feel for how Hexyl was regarded in the field currently. I received nearly 100 responses to my survey and want to thank everyone that took the time to participate. The responses I got were thorough and varied and confirmed to me that Hexyl is being used across the field with a variety of current working methods. One of my primary takeaways was that Hexyl, like many conservation materials, has a time and place for its use. In many instances of glass repair, more reversible materials such as B72 are better suited both ethically and practically than Hexyl. It also seems likely that when Hexyl is used, the method of preparation can have a detrimental impact on the long-term stability of the material if done improperly. Hexyl is best implemented with careful planning and precision. In the case of this treatment, I did choose to move forward using Hexyl. Because the glass pane acts as the viewing medium for the painting itself, I felt that it was important for it to be as optically cohesive as possible. Later in the treatment section, I'll talk more about the techniques I developed when working with Hexyl on this specific project. Looking past the structural damage to the glass, there was concern that the paint layer on the painting may be friable. As a precaution, the pieces were housed paint side up during initial imaging and examination. Because of this, the before treatment images only show the back, and many compositional details are obscured. The transmitted light image highlights the area in the bottom left that has suffered the largest losses to the paint, and you may also notice the corner beside it is empty. That piece is not missing, but it was adhered paint side down to a magazine page. At one time, this magazine page was also adhered to the adjacent glass pieces, most likely as an attempt to mend the breaks and keep the pieces together. From the initial examination, it was clear that the treatment of this object would require a union of both paper, paintings, and objects techniques. In addition to separating the paper from the glass, it was hoped that some of the paint seen here could be recovered and reunited with the composition. In addition to the fractured glass support and the adhered paper, there are numerous small areas of paint loss across the panel. Most were stable and the result of abrasion, but the largest area of loss was the result of the adhesion damage done by the magazine page. 2 small areas of unstable flaking paint were identified, both located in the red paint on the older figure. And finally, there were numerous minor chips to the break edges and a blind crack in one of the glass fragments. Working from back to front, the paint layer was cleaned and the areas of flaking paint were consolidated. A past graduate, Steph Gadera, who I owe much thanks to, has done thorough research into consolidation materials for reverse glass painting specifically, and determined that Larapol A81 and Shellsil A100 and D38 gave the best combination of wettability, adhesion, and optical clarity when viewed through the glass. Unstable areas of paint were gently warmed with a radiant heat tool to increase their flexibility before the Larapol was applied. A heated spatula was then used to apply gentle pressure and set the flakes into place. With the paint consolidated, the pieces could be safely flipped onto their backs, but before doing so, a Regal Res barrier layer was applied to the back around the break edges to protect the paint from any Hexyl that might leak through during its application. Regal Res is insoluble in acetone, which Hexyl is easily cleaned up in, making it the perfect protective layer for the paint. After the epoxy was applied and cured, the Regal Res is easily reversed in odorless mineral spirits. With the pieces flipped, I was able to clean the front of the glass, revealing bright saturated colors and finer details. And while the swabs were certainly taking off a lot of dirt, there were many small localized areas of stubborn grime. I turned to gel and gum to reduce the amount of time, solvents, and mechanical action needed to fully remove this stubborn dirt. Even though the glass surface was stable and could withstand the amount of mechanical action and acetone needed to scrub these spots away, short applications of simple DIY water gel and gum to the surface moistened them enough that they could be gently wiped away with a cotton swab instead. After flipping and cleaning, the entire composition could finally be appreciated. You can see how luminous the colors are when viewed through the glass and how intricate the patterns used on the robes are. At last, I got to begin joining the glass. Time was of the essence, so rather than joining one piece at a time, as would be a traditional approach to this treatment, I joined the fragments in pairs, joining larger and larger sections together until I could ultimately join the top and bottom halves. This ran the risk of causing a lockout situation or unforeseen misalignment, so I was strategic about which pieces I was joining in which order, and created a plan that moved week to week, as I let the Hexyl set for 7 days in between each join. Before aligning each piece, the edges were cleaned under magnification to remove any particulates and Regal Res that may have spilled over the edge. One little thing about this piece that I've yet to mention is that the glass support is not entirely flat. It has a deceptively significant convex curve to it when viewed from the front. I found that many of the pieces fit together extremely well horizontally and vertically, but would be slightly misaligned in depth along the break. To achieve alignment in all 3 dimensions, I used Mylar stacks to gently lift and support some areas along the break edge and small weights to secure and flatten others. Working under the microscope allowed me to get the tightest possible fit between pieces and quickly identify if anything was even slightly out of line. I used a small dental tool to check for good planar alignment by running it gently back and forth across the joint edge where it would be stopped by any lifted edges. Once satisfied with the alignment, I'd apply the Hexyl in small drops along the break. Applied in this way, the Hexyl would quickly fill the entire break, usually in about 30 minutes. Though Hexyl drops could be left on the surface and cleaned up mechanically with mechanic action later, cleanup was much faster if the excess Hexyl was first removed with a cotton swab the day of application. Before removing the Hexyl drops, I wanted to be sure Hexyl has flowed through the entire join. I found that a flashlight shown perpendicular to the break edges would clearly reveal areas where the Hexyl had not yet spread. After the pieces were rejoined, I began the process of filling the chips and losses along the break edges with Hexyl to further minimize their appearance. There is no method of reducing Hexyl that does not mar the optically clear quality of the epoxy, so the fill must be exact. This can be difficult to achieve at the scale necessary, and the glass is often reflective in a way that makes judging depth and location of chips deceptively difficult. In search of an especially small brush, I bought a pack of nail art brushes online and found them to be the perfect tool for in-painting Hexyl into cracks and losses. Their long fibers and thin tips can apply incredibly small amounts of Hextol into precise locations. Due to the time constraints caused by Hextol's long cure time, the final filling of these cracks is still ongoing. Did you forget about this guy? Because I almost did both when I was completing the treatment and when I was writing this presentation afterwards. And that's not because it is all insignificant, but rather because it feels a little like embarking on a whole separate treatment. As hoped, FTIR testing indicated that the adhesive on the paper was proteinaceous and likely an animal glue soluble in water. Gelling gum was then used to moisten the glue, allowing it to be separated from the paper with gentle lifting. Once separated from the paper, the glass was left with a fragile paint surface with a heavy coating of glue. A careful cycle of paint consolidation followed by aqueous removal of the glue on cotton swabs was repeated until the glue and paper remnants were satisfactorily removed. The glass was then joined along with the rest of the fragments. Returning to the paper and lost paint, I began preparing mock-ups to test the feasibility of reuniting the paint with the composition. The paint layer on the paper was very thin. The adhesive holding it in place was aged and cupped, causing the majority of the paint to crack and deform along with it. To reduce the amount of handling the paint would need to endure, the decision was made to use the magazine paper as if it were already a sort of facing. Cutting the paper into more manageable groupings of paint, I removed small, isolated samples to use in mock-ups. Using a mirrored table, which I will discuss in greater depth shortly, I mimicked aligning the paint samples onto glass slides, using Sharpie outlines to imitate areas of loss in the composition. Initially, test proved promising, but I was able to adhere my first samples to the slide. But removing the paper and leaving the paint proved to be a separate issue. The effort necessary to remove the paper was greater than any adhesion level I could achieve between the paint and the glass. Skimming the paper to a thinner layer, flattening the paint and adhesive using heat, prolonging the drying under weight, and several different adhesives were tested, but all to no avail. The strength of the aged animal glue was incredibly strong and outmatched them all. Here you can see an example of a test I pushed to completion for the sake of experimentation, starting with an adhered paint flake that the thickest layer of paper had been mostly successfully removed from. I wetted and attempted to remove the remaining paper from the surface. Even careful efforts resulted in a great deal of paint loss. In addition, this mock-up illustrates the success rate of a relatively well-adhered paint fragment, but many would entirely separate from the glass in favor of the paper host with even the slightest mechanical action. Because of this, attempts to reunite the lost paint was halted. However, the paper will be housed with the artwork in the hopes that a future practice or material might make this treatment possible in the future. The practicality of future reconciliation of the lost paint to the glass is further made possible by the method of in-painting I used. Early on in this project, I developed the idea that the paint losses in this piece could be compensated in an entirely non-invasive way without applying foreign materials to the object. I tested whether acrylic paint on Mylar would be optically comparable to the original paint if secured behind the artwork. The Mylar is shiny, and in certain angles of light, a reflection can be cast on it through the glass, obscuring the paint below, but for the most part, painted Mylar meshed well with the visual characteristics of the paint on glass. Conveniently, this effect was best achieved by painting the backside of the Mylar, which mimicked the in-painting of paint on glass, and this then acted as a barrier layer between the paint and the in-painting. In order to see the front of the piece while in-painting from behind, Fiona helped me create a mirrored glass setup. A mirror was placed at a low angle on the table with a transparent glass working surface lifted on risers above it. The artwork was then placed front down on the elevated working surface. From above, the back of the artwork can clearly be seen and worked on, while leaning down slightly to look in the mirror allows you to see the front. While the setup does allow the front and back to be seen simultaneously, it is not a perfect system. The necessary angle of the mirror made it harder to see the furthest edge of the panel, while the transparency of the piece created a transmitted effect, causing the paint to appear very visually different from its normal state. To approximate more standard viewing conditions, I would place blue board over the top of the piece to block light from below. This, of course, made the view of the mirror quite dark. After initially trying to compensate with artificial light, I found that natural light reflected in the mirror created a far more realistic render. Even with natural light, the piece's reflection in the mirror was not entirely reliable depiction of reality. Colors appeared entirely different transmitted through both the glass and the Mylar than they did on the back of the piece. Luckily, color compensations were made by simply painting out small swatches on Mylar and laying them over the losses to see how well they blended. Sometimes I could tell immediately after applying a color that it was not a close enough match and needed to be removed. The acrylic paint could be easily scratched off the Mylar with a dull tool, but I actually found my fingernail to give me the best control and produce the least amount of scratching on the Mylar. Despite the many visual challenges involved in the process of reverse glass inpainting, the Mylar gave me a lot more freedom and safety than inpainting directly on the object would have. Only the additions of small hexel fills and the removal of the real-res barrier remain for the object's treatment, which will be completed in the coming weeks. Though unframed when it arrived due to its structural damage, this piece will eventually be framed to secure the inpainting into position. This framing will also allow the inpainting to be aligned closer in contact with the piece, reducing the slight shadows seen in this image. There's a really long list of people who helped me throughout this project, and I want to thank the generous donors who made my education possible. Thank you to quite literally every faculty member, because I consulted with every one of you on some portion of this project, but especially my advisors, Emily Hamilton and Fiona Beckett. I want to thank all the conservators who so willingly talk to me about Hextall. I want to thank Mackenzie for looking at so much Hextall with me. I want to thank my dear, dear classmates for all the laughs and all the comfort. And I want to thank my parents for teaching me how to see, my sister for knowing me like no one else does, and Will for loving me and making sure I remember to take breaks. It was a really great year.
Excellent. We have time for a few questions, if anyone.
Wonderful presentation, Madison. I'm curious where that 100-year number for Hextall comes from. Or is that a hole? Did I just open up a hole?
Yeah, you did open up a hole.
Yeah.
That's actually something I was specifically investigating. That kind of was what opened up the door into Hextall for me, is that in looking at a lot of different vendor recommendations and like supposed studies on Hextall, like everyone just had like slightly different recommendations for how it should be stored, how it should be prepared, when it started to yellow, why it started to yellow. And I just felt like there wasn't a lot of like conclusive like methodology or like feel for like whether we were or were not supposed to be using this material. So I've done a lot of looking into that, and my survey specifically kind of asked people what they thought it was to see like what the field generally uses as a number. But the 100 years comes from the Hextall manufacturer themselves.
I'll ask one. Did you consider any other types of paint for inpainting beyond acrylics?
Yeah. I didn't do like a lot of tests with other inpainting media besides acrylic, because acrylic seemed best suited for what I was doing since it was on Mylar, and I was a little worried about the adhesion, and acrylic dries really fast, which was in and of itself difficult in mixing the paints and getting like the blend between paint layers. There's like a section of pink to green that was like, I had to inpaint that, and blending that with acrylic was kind of difficult to get it to mimic oil paint. I did test a little bit with watercolors, and they seemed like they bonded okay to the Mylar, but they were, I don't know, almost too transparent, and I found that the acrylic it was easier to get the right color in the acrylic as opposed to the watercolor.
Great. Thank you so much.
It's my great pleasure to introduce our last speaker for the morning session before we break for lunch. Renata Gumkowska, originally from Poland, obtained a BA in art history and studio art with a minor in chemistry from Hunter College in New York. She further enriched her skills by immersing herself in life drawing at the Art Students League of New York. During her time in New York City, she undertook roles as a pre-program intern in the anthropology department at the American Museum of Natural History, and as a collection assistant at the American Folk Art Museum. Additionally, Renata served as a conservation assistant at Luca Bonetti Corporation, a private conservation practice in Chelsea, and completed a summer internship at the Aurora Art Conservation in Niagara Falls, New York. Renata eagerly anticipates commencing her one-year internship this fall at the Cleveland Museum of Art, where she will be working under the guidance of Dean Yoder, the Senior Conservator of Paintings. Please welcome Renata.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Greta, for the lovely introduction. Today, I am thrilled to share my master project, an 18th century Venezuelan ex voto panel painting from the Toma Foundation. The painting was created in 1752 during the Spanish colonial period in the Viceroyalty of New Granada. The artwork was allegedly commissioned for Don Agustin de Torres, a lieutenant colonel in the Spanish Royal Army during his posting in Caracas in 1752. The panel painting has an engaged frame and is executed in oils by an unknown artist. I will provide a brief historical context, share the process of identifying artist materials, and discuss the treatment process. Thank you. The painting was created, sorry, I got distracted. Okay, thank you. By the early 18th century, northern South America held strategic importance within the Spanish-American Empire. Though it lacked the economic and political prominence of New Spain and Peru, which had silver mines. The province of Venezuela, initially part of New Granada, later became the Captaincy General of Venezuela in 1777. This integration brought new trade opportunities, particularly the exchange of artworks and pigments essential for political, economic, and religious unity. The composition of the ex voto here is heavily influenced by iconography from the Catholic faith. Ex voto is a Latin term signifying a vow or promise made to divinity as gratitude for their assistance. This tradition originated in 15th century Italy and spread to the Americas with Spanish colonizers. At the very top is a depiction of God and the Holy Spirit. Below is the Lady of the Pillar of Zaragoza holding Christ child, who holds the orb of the world, symbolizing his role as the universal savior of mankind. At the right side of the Virgin's feet is Saint Joseph. Much of the pillar holding the Virgin is obscured by a roundel with Saint Michael. Dr. Veronica Munoz Nahar Lugue, curator at Toma, identified the saint in the top left as possibly Saint Augustine. Despite lacking his usual symbol of a flaming heart, she suggested he might be depicted as a doctor of the church because he holds a book and quill and wears a bishop's cape. This association is reinforced by the sponsorship of the work by Agustin de Torres, who shares a name with the saint. Identifying the saint in the top right is trickier, as he only holds a martyr's palm and a symbol shared by multiple saints. At the bottom left is depicted Saint Anthony of Padua with the Christ child, also holding the orb. And at the bottom right is depicted Saint John Nepomuc. The painting has two inscriptions, one on the front and one on the back. The back inscription specifies that the work was offered to Torres in the name of the Chapel of the Holy Angels at the Church of La Santísima Trinidad in Caracas, seen on the image on the right. Construction of the church began in 1746 and held significant meaning for the Bolivar family. Simon Bolivar, a Venezuelan military leader, played a key role in liberating colonies from Spanish rule and was baptized and received his first communion there. The inscription at the front is a poem that starts by alluding to Archangel Michael's defeat of Satan in the war in heaven directed by God. It compares Agustin de Torres to Saint Michael, likening him to God's lieutenant colonel, and asserts that with the Trinity's support, he will overcome his adversaries. The poem concludes with a play on the name Torres, which translates to towers, and the symbolism of the tower as a symbol of strength. I further investigated the observations made by the scholar Dr. Catherine Sandner. According to her research, the painting was possibly created for the art market and simply customized with an inscription based on the small size of the text located within the much larger banderole area. Historically, written inscriptions occupy the entire banderole. Moreover, Dr. Ananda Cohen-Aponte highlighted that the inscription within the paintings often aim to mimic the appearance of printed text, as illustrated in the example below. However, the inscription on the ex voto has a style as it was inscribed with a quill. A letter P appears beneath the letter M in the word Miguel. This may confirm the theory that the work was pre-made and specifically customized for Agustin de Torres. I suspected that the first row of the back inscription might have been executed separately due to its straighter alignment compared to the rest of the text and its higher concentration of heavy metals in the painting medium. However, XRF analysis revealed that the composition of the entire text is consistent throughout. The painting is executed on a single-piece wooden panel with an engaged frame. The wooden grain direction is vertical and slightly diagonal, suggesting radial cut. The tool marks are visible at the back of the panel, and it was possibly smoothed with a draw knife. The frame consists of 5 components indicated with yellow lines, and it is secured to the panel with about 14 wooden dowels, circled in yellow. There were 2 coats of varnish, the synthetic coating fluoresced in blue, and the natural resin varnish fluoresced in green-yellow. In the UV image, early restoration effort appeared as black spots. In the false color image, the previous restoration is visible as green and dark purple. Here is an example of how the original artwork changed as a result of previous conservation efforts. This is a top left saint identified as Saint Augustine. While looking at the X-ray image, I discovered a cross on the saint's chest marked in yellow. While comparing the X-ray image with the UVA visible fluorescence image, the cross had been entirely overpainted. I will provide additional details about the cross in the upcoming treatment section of my presentation. Multiple restoration efforts were revealed by the damaged area on the frame's bottom right corner. The damage, while viewed under a microscope, showed multiple ground and paint finishes. This section explores paint stratigraphy and pigment analysis in detail, highlighting efforts to identify originally used pigments and materials. Detailed images of various areas of loss, studied under the microscope, evidence a possible red imprimatura layer. The imprimatura layer also shows on the cross-section images. Small samples marked in yellow on the image to the left were collected from areas of damage or loss and later mounted in resin and studied very closely under the optical microscope with FTIR and Raman spectroscopies and scanning electron microscope. I know this is a very busy slide, and it is more of an attempt to organize the results of the XRF SPAT analysis, which marked the beginning of my exploration into the elemental makeup of painting materials. I was cross-referencing the data collected from spectra with established literature on prevalent pigments from the Spanish colonial period in the Americas. The results reveal the possible painting pigments that might be present in this ex voto. At this point, not everything made sense to me. Lead and iron were consistently detected in all examined samples. To refine my analysis, I conducted further examinations such as FTIR, Raman, and SEM EDX. The FTIR microscope transmission analysis were performed with assistance of Rebecca. The analysis revealed the ground layer's material composition and provided information about some of the pigments. Interestingly, the analysis confirmed the presence of Prussian blue and showed evidence of lead carbonate, which would be from naturally occurring mineral cerussite, or it could be human-made lead-white pigment. Both of them were used during that period. In the ground layer, gypsum, calcium sulfate, and calcium carbonate were found along proteinaceous material that would be used to prepare the ground layer in addition to cellulose-based material. The FTIR spectra of blue-green sample, upper red, compared to Prussian blue reference, bottom spectrum, show an overlapping peak highlighted in the blue field, confirming the presence of Prussian blue pigment. This information narrowed down the possible suspects listed in the earlier BZ XRF slide. Prussian blue possesses high tinting strength relative to its small particle size, meaning that only very small quantities might be present in a sample that otherwise appears very blue. Prussian blue, also known as Berlin blue, among other blue pigments, was widely used in late Indian colonial paintings. It was accidentally discovered in 1704 by color maker Ghislain Diesbach in Berlin. A newly discovered bright blue pigment was manufactured in France from 1725, and its use spread like wildfire across Europe and the Americas. According to literature, Prussian blue served as a replacement for azurite and rare lapis lazuli. In collaboration with Dr. Greg Smith from the Indianapolis Museum of Art, Raman spectroscopy was conducted on the cross-section sample I collected from the area of loss on Mary's blue-green mantle. Greg's analyses were beneficial in identifying the composition of each layer present in the painting. A blue pigment layer, number 1, compared to reference spectra for Prussian blue, again shows an overlapping peak highlighted in blue. A gray-colored reserve layer, number 2, between the blue paint and the orange imprimatura consists of lead carbonate, with some large carbon black particles. An orangish imprimatura layer number 3 was identified as hematite. The white ground layer number 4 is comprised of a gypsum and anhydrite mixture. The lowest layer in the section shows an anomalous red paint layer below the white ground marked as number 5. That lowest red layer has hematite as the red pigment. Additionally, a Raman analysis were performed on a red cross-section sample collected from the top Rhine Saint clock. The red pigment was identified as vermilion. SEM-EDX analysis conducted on a blue-green sample extracted from the area of the Virgin's mantle in collaboration with Patrick revealed interesting results. Additional elements including sodium, calcium, aluminum, silicon, and sulfur alongside iron, potassium, manganese, and lead were found. Upper elements highlighted in a blue rectangle would be consistent with ultramarine blue. Natural ultramarine blue, also known as lapis lazuli, was a very expensive pigment, and it was largely replaced by other blues that were less expensive. Because the sample is so small, it is difficult to confirm its relevant context within the larger work. Further research is required to confirm this finding. The characteristics of Prussian blue observed in the reference image on the left align with those seen on the particle collected from Mary's mantle. The extremely fine particle size typically forms aggregates exhibiting varying shades of blue, ranging from moderately translucent to deep blue with low translucency, and even opaque. When viewed under cross-polarized light, these aggregates appear isotropic. The XRF analysis suggested the presence of arsenic sulfide, which is found in orpiment and realgar at the same time. Both tend to form in the same geological environments and can be closely associated in the same deposits. The sample of a yellow pigment collected from the painting when viewed under plane polarized light and cross polars match the characteristics of the orpiment mineral. And I couldn't decide which one is nicer. Here is a summary of the technical analysis I performed and the materials I identified. While the palette displays several pigments, it's crucial to acknowledge the possibility of additional pigments in the artwork, yet further research is necessary to validate this possibility. The table to the right provides a summary of materials found in the ground layer. These materials include mixture of gypsum in different hydration states and glue used as a binder. This was not only an aesthetic treatment of the panel painting, but also involved addressing structural damage that occurred during transport. Upon the arrival of the artwork to the department, there was a split in the engaged frame at the bottom right corner, and some of the paint chipped off at the top center edge. Given wood's hygroscopic nature, with its tendency to absorb and release moisture to balance with the surrounding climate, which can lead to warping, I created a custom-made microclimate box to maintain a stable relative humidity level of 50% inside. These images depict the progress of removing the topmost synthetic varnish layer. The left image shows extensive overpainting from multiple restoration campaigns indicated in black. In the middle image, the right half of the panel displays the removed varnish layer, revealing yellow-green fluorescence underneath. The right image illustrates the reduction of the varnish layer and most of the old-in painting from the entire surface. Upon removing the topmost varnish layer, the panel surface fluoresced yellow-green, suggesting the potential presence of a natural resin varnish. With the assistance of Rebecca, I conducted PyGCMS analysis. The spectra revealed the presence of resin sourced from a tree within the Pinacea family. Gabriel Siracusano, the author of Pigments and Power in the Andes, noted that among the resins used during the period were coniferous balsams like turpentines or colophonian gums, including the renowned Venice turpentine. Given these insights and the need to use a highly polar solvent to remove it, I opted to leave it intact. As I mentioned before, past restoration campaigns were very extensive. I was able to reduce most of the overpaint. Please note the size of the loss and the amount of the in-painting media, which in most cases covers the original artist's materials. Before proceeding with any aesthetic compensation, I applied an isolating varnish layer. This step provided extra protection for the original artist materials, and it is removable. I filled losses in the paint and ground layer using Pfluger and toned the filled areas with Kremer watercolors. Next, I sealed the watercolor toning and proceeded with in-painting using dry pigments in aldehyde resin. After consultations with conservators Alan Miller, from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and Dean Yoder from the Cleveland Museum of Art, I created mock-ups of fill solutions to find the most suitable option for the split that occurred in the bottom corner of the frame. I decided to test and evaluate 4 options: epoxy araldite 1253, B72, Tidebond 3, PVA wood glue, and Jade 403. Adhesives were bulked in 3 ways: with coconut husk flour, a mixture of coconut husk flour with glass microballoons, and cellulose powder. I assessed the final product with consideration for removability, malleability, strength, and texture. I found out that the B72 bulked with coconut husk and glass microballoons displayed the most favorable characteristics. Due to its slightly rough texture, which would be difficult to in-paint to match the surrounding surface on the frame, I underfilled the gap and added a thin layer of Flugger for a more smooth finish seen in image 2. If you remember the slide I presented earlier showing the discovery of a cross on the chest of the saint identified as Saint Augustine, the right image reveals remnants of the left wing and a portion of the vertical bar, although it is obscured due to damage. I decided to recreate the missing section of the cross, but first, I examined several depictions of Saint Augustine, studying pieces from the collections of the Prado Museum, the National Museum of Mexico City, and the Denver Museum of Art. In each portrayal, the cross was prominently featured, and the frame appeared to be crafted from gold with embedded dark precious stones. After in-painting of fills and abrasions, I applied the final varnish layer, and here are the before and after shots of Saint Augustine after he got the cross back on his chest. And some of the details on the frame after application of the fill and in-painting. And the overall images of the before and after completion of the treatment. The painting will be traveling back to Toma Foundation in a custom-made shipping solution that will accommodate the vulnerability of the painting's corners. I would like to thank my supervisor Fiona Beckett, and my co-advisors, Juan Chen, Dr. Rebecca Plodger, and Patrick Rabines. Toma Foundation for providing the wonderful project, and all scholars and faculty who helped me with this research. Thank you to everyone in the department, my classmates from classes of 2024, 25, 26, for your support and help. Thank you to my family and friends, particularly my partner, David Gibbs, Mrs. Patricia Gibbs, and my mom, Małgorzata. I'm emotional. And I am also very grateful for the financial support from the Fellowship and Scholarship Foundations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renata. Beautiful presentation. We have time for one question, and I'll go ahead and ask. Could you tell us about the coconut flower, the coconut husk flower, and how you came introduced?
Yes, so we explored existing literature and research on fill materials and adhesive and bulking agents that can be used. And I found a very nice resource that listed coconut flour and listed also other and tested other materials, and coconut flour had the most favorable, highly graded properties. Apparently, it has a little bit of flexibility while it absorbs moisture, so it can breathe, even though it's mixed with the adhesive. So that was the desired property for the fill, because I didn't want to create anything too stiff that would create a constraint on the wood and possibly cause any cracks in the future. So that's why. Thank you.
So you are all free to go, but please make sure that you are seated by 1:55 so that everyone gets a chance to get questions. Thank you.